This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still don't know what happened that day in the woods, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. It's been about 7 months now, and I still get this sick feeling in my stomach whenever I think about it. I haven't told many people. Who would believe me anyway? I've always been into urban exploration. There's something about abandoned places that just draws me in, the stories they hold, the lives that once filled them. I'm not talking about the famous spots everyone knows about. I prefer the forgotten places, the ones that don't even show up on maps anymore. That's how I found the cabin. I live in this small town in Missouri where nothing ever happens. Seriously, the most exciting thing we get is when someone's cow escapes and blocks traffic on Main Street. So I spend a lot of my free time hiking and exploring the forests that surround our town. There are old mining sites, abandoned homesteads, that sort of thing. I'd heard rumors about an old mountain house deep in the northern woods, but I'd never been able to find it. Then one day in late October, I was following this barely there trail I'd never noticed before. The leaves had started falling, which probably exposed the path. I wasn't even looking for anything specific that day, just needed to clear my head after a crappy week at work. After hiking for maybe 2 hours, I came across what looked like an overgrown gravel road. It was completely reclaimed by nature. Vines, weeds, small saplings growing right through it. But you could still tell it had once been a proper access road. Something in my gut told me to follow it. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked. It was getting late in the afternoon, maybe around 4 o'clock, and the sun was already starting to sink. The air had that crisp fall chill that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I remember thinking I should probably turn back soon since I didn't want to get caught in the woods after dark. Then I saw it. About 5 minutes up the gravel path, partially hidden by overgrown bushes and tree branches, was a 2-story cabin. It looked like it had been built sometime in the 70s or 80s, not super old, but definitely abandoned for a long time. The wood siding had turned this ashy gray color, and parts of the roof were sagging. My first thought was disappointment, honestly. I'd been hoping for something more impressive, like those massive old Victorian homes you sometimes find abandoned in the middle of nowhere. This was just ordinary, a forgotten vacation home or hunting cabin. Still, I'd come all this way. Might as well check it out. I approached slowly, taking pictures with my phone. The place was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I didn't see any signs warning me to keep out, no private property notices. Nothing to indicate anyone still cared about this place. The front of the cabin had a small porch with steps that looked ready to collapse. There was a large window next to the door with one of its panes broken. I peered through it, shining my flashlight inside. The beam cut through the dusty air, illuminating what must have been the living room. I could make out an old couch with the cushions torn up, some fallen picture frames, general debris on the floor. Nothing unusual for an abandoned place. I tried the front door, and to my surprise, it was partially open already. It creaked loudly as I pushed it wider, that deep, horror movie kind of creak that normally would have made me laugh. This time, though, it just made the place feel even more desolate. "Hello?" I called out, more out of habit than anything else. My voice echoed slightly, then disappeared into the musty silence. The interior smelled like mildew, rotting wood, and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe animals had been living inside. The living room was small, with the broken couch facing a fireplace. Picture frames had fallen from the walls, their glass shattered across the wooden floor. I carefully stepped around the debris. Connected to the living room was what must have been a kitchen, though most of the appliances had been removed. All that remained was a rusted sink and some broken cabinet doors hanging from their hinges. Nothing interesting. I'd only been inside for a minute or two, but something felt off. Not necessarily threatening, just wrong somehow. Like the air was a little too thick, the shadows a little too deep. I chalked it up to my imagination and decided to check out the second floor before heading back. The staircase was at the back of the house, a narrow wooden thing that protested loudly with each step I took. About halfway up, one of the boards groaned so alarmingly that I froze, genuinely afraid it might give way beneath me. I tested it carefully with my weight before continuing, moving closer to the wall where the stairs would be more supported. The second floor had a short hallway with 2 doorways, one open, one closed. The open doorway led to what might have been a bedroom, though it was completely empty. No furniture, no debris, nothing. Just bare wooden floors and walls with peeling wallpaper. It seemed strange that this room would be so clean compared to the mess downstairs. I swept my flashlight around the empty room, noticing water stains on the ceiling. That's when I heard it, a noise from below. Not the settling sounds old houses make, but something else, something deliberate. It sounded like dragging, like something heavy being slowly pulled across the floor. My heart immediately started racing. I've been in enough abandoned places to know that unusual sounds mean it's time to leave. Sometimes it's just animals, but sometimes it's other people. People you definitely don't want to meet. I turned off my flashlight and stood completely still, listening. The dragging sound stopped. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps, slow and purposeful, moving across the first floor. Shit. Someone else was in the house. I needed to get out. Fast. I crept back to the staircase, careful to avoid the step that had creaked so loudly before. My palms were sweating as I gripped the railing. The footsteps below had stopped. Whoever was down there seemed to be listening too. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I immediately pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing. The living room was just around the corner. If I could make it to the front door, I'd be out in seconds. I took a deep breath and moved quickly toward the entrance. But when I reached the front of the house, my stomach dropped. The door I'd left partially open, was now firmly closed. I grabbed the knob and turned it, pulling hard. It wouldn't budge, not stuck, but locked from the inside. That's when real panic set in. Someone had closed and locked that door while I was upstairs. Someone who was still in the house with me. I could hear the footsteps again, coming from the kitchen area, heading toward the living room where I stood frozen in fear. I had seconds to decide what to do. The broken window. It was my only option. I moved to the window I'd peered through earlier. The opening where the glass was broken wasn't large, but I thought I could squeeze through it. I used my jacket sleeve to clear away the remaining shards from the frame, wincing as one sliced through the fabric and nicked my arm. The footsteps were getting closer. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see who or what was approaching. I pushed myself through the window opening head first, feeling the rough edges scrape against my back as I wiggled through. I tumbled onto the porch in an ungraceful heap, immediately scrambling to my feet. I ran. I didn't look back at the cabin, didn't try to see who might be watching from the windows. I just ran, crashing through underbrush, following the overgrown gravel path back to the main trail. My lungs burned and branches whipped at my face, but I didn't slow down. I'd made it about halfway, back to the main trail when I saw lights in the distance, blue and green flashing through the trees. Police lights, multiple vehicles from the look of it, moving fast on some road I couldn't see, heading in the direction of the cabin. I killed my flashlight and ducked behind a thick tree trunk, trying to catch my breath as quietly as possible. Through gaps in the trees, I could see at least 3 police cars racing along what must have been a service road that paralleled the trail I was on. Their sirens were off, but the lights painted the forest in alternating flashes of color. Something told me they weren't there for me, some random trespasser. This was something else, something bigger. I waited until the police cars had passed, then counted to 60 before continuing on, moving more carefully now, staying in the shadows. Eventually, I reached the main trail and made it back to my car without incident. As I drove home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. What the hell had happened back there? Who had been in that house with me? And why were the police heading there so quickly after I'd left? Over the next few weeks, I obsessively checked our local news outlets, police blotters, even social media for any mention of the cabin or police activity in the woods that day. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I even drove back to the trailhead once, thinking I might hike in just far enough to see if there was any evidence of police activity. Crime scene tape, tire tracks, anything. But I couldn't make myself get out of the car. The thought of going back into those woods made me physically ill. I've tried to convince myself that there's a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a homeless person who'd taken up residence in the cabin. Maybe the police were there on an unrelated matter. Maybe the door wasn't actually locked, just stuck. And my panic made me imagine things. But deep down, I know better. Someone was in that house. Someone who knew I was there and deliberately tried to trap me inside. And whatever brought the police there that day, arriving just minutes after I fled, I don't think it was a coincidence. I still explore abandoned places sometimes, but never alone anymore. And I stay far away from the northern woods. Whatever happened in that cabin, whatever I almost walked into, I got lucky. I got out. Some questions are better left unanswered. Story 2. I've been camping in the Carpathians for years, but what happened last summer still gives me nightmares. I can't explain it, and I've tried talking to local rangers about it, but they just laugh it off. I know what I saw wasn't normal. There were 5 of us on this trip. Me, my brother Alex, and 3 friends from university. Mihai, Dana, and Stefan. We'd planned this for months, wanting to explore some of the more remote trails in the Eastern Carpathians. We're all experienced hikers, not the type to panic over nothing or misread animal behavior. It was our 3rd day when we found what seemed like a perfect camping spot. We'd been hiking since early morning and were exhausted. The site was in a small clearing near a stream, sheltered by pine trees on one side and offering a beautiful view of the valley below. The ground was relatively flat, ideal for setting up tents. I noticed the cowpats right away. They were scattered throughout the area, some fresh, some dried. Nothing unusual about that. The mountains are grazing grounds during summer months. Local farmers let their cattle roam free, and they often wander pretty far up. I'd seen it before on other trips. We should be fine as long as we keep our food sealed, I remember telling the others. The cows usually keep their distance. We set up our 3 tents, one for Dana and me, one for Alex and Stefan, and Mihai had his own small tent. We cooked dinner over a small fire, had a few beers, shared some stories. It was peaceful. The summer air was cool but comfortable. We could hear the stream bubbling nearby, crickets chirping, normal camping stuff. I remember waking up around 5 in the morning. The sun wasn't fully up yet, but it was light enough to see. At first I wasn't sure what had woken me, maybe a bird or just the early light. Then I heard it, a low rumbling sound, like a growl but deeper, more deliberate. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out, and my stomach dropped. Cows, everywhere. At least 30 of them had surrounded our campsite during the night. They were standing oddly still, just watching our tents. I've been around farm animals my whole life, and this wasn't normal behavior. They weren't grazing or moving around. They were just standing there, forming an almost perfect circle around us. What really made my skin crawl was the bull. He stood directly opposite my tent, maybe 15 meters away. He was massive, easily twice the size of the cows, with a pure white coat that seemed to glow in the early morning light. His muscles rippled under his skin with each small movement. His horns were thick and curved slightly upward, looking sharp enough to impale someone with minimal effort. But it was his eyes that terrified me. Dark, almost black, and fixed directly on my tent. I swear he knew I was watching him. There was an intelligence there that I've never seen in an animal before. I ducked back inside and gently shook Dana awake. "There's something wrong outside," I whispered, trying not to let panic seep into my voice. "A herd of cows has surrounded us." She thought I was joking at first, but the look on my face must have convinced her. She peeked out and immediately pulled back. "What do we do?" she whispered. "I'm going to wake the others," I said. "Don't make any sudden movements." I called out to the other tents, keeping my voice low but urgent. "Guys, wake up. We have a situation." I heard stirring from Alex and Stefan's tent. Mihai was slower to respond. "What's going on?" Alex called back. "We're surrounded by cattle. There's a bull that looks wrong. Just move slowly and—" I never finished that sentence. The bull let out a bellow that shook the air around us. It wasn't like any sound I'd heard a bull make before. It was deeper, almost like it came from somewhere beneath the earth. The cows shifted restlessly, but maintained their circle. Then the bull charged. It happened so fast. 1 second he was standing still. The next, he was a blur of white muscle barreling toward Mihai's tent. Mihai barely had time to scramble out before the bull hit the tent with such force that it was completely flattened. If he'd been even 2 seconds slower. The bull didn't stop there. He tossed his head, catching the remains of the tent on his horns, and flung it into the air like it weighed nothing. Pieces of fabric and bent tent poles scattered across the clearing. Then he backed up, returning to his original position, eyes now fixed on Mihai, who was pressing himself against a tree trunk, too terrified to move. "Nobody move," I whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Just stay completely still." For about 10 minutes, nobody breathed. The bull maintained his position, occasionally pawing at the ground. The cows shifted but kept their rough circle formation. It was like they were waiting for something. Stefan, always the practical one, whispered, "We need to scare them off. Make noise, wave our arms." "I don't think that's a good idea," I responded. But Alex was already reaching for the pot we'd used for cooking the night before. "On 3, he said. "We all yell and make as much noise as possible. 1, 2, 3. We all shouted, banged pots against each other, waved our arms. It was the worst mistake we could have made. The bull charged again, this time toward Alex and Stefan's tent. They dove out of the way just in time. The bull's horn caught the edge of their tent, tearing through the fabric like paper. He didn't demolish it completely this time, just turned and faced us again, snorting, his breath visible in the cool morning air. Now we were all outside our tents, pressed against trees or rocks, afraid to move even an inch. The bulls seemed to be watching all of us at once, deciding who to target next. "This isn't normal," Donna whispered beside me. Her hand found mine and squeezed so tight it hurt. "Bulls don't behave like this." She was right. I'd grown up near farms. Bulls can be aggressive, territorial, but this was different. This felt targeted, intelligent, like the bull was deliberately keeping us trapped. We stayed like that for hours, 4 hours to be exact. The sun rose fully, warming the clearing, but nobody dared move. My legs cramped, my mouth was dry, but every time someone shifted even slightly, the bull would snort and take a step forward. Around 9 in the morning, something changed. One of the cows at the edge of the circle began to drift away, moving toward the trees to graze. Then another followed. Slowly, the circle began to break up as the cows returned to normal behavior. The bull remained, watching us with those dark eyes. He snorted once, pawed the ground, then turned to follow the herd. But he kept looking back every few steps, as if checking that we weren't following. It wasn't until the bull disappeared completely into the trees that any of us dared to move. "What the actual fuck was that?" Mihai's voice was shaking as he surveyed the remains of his tent. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we need to get out of here now." We packed up what remained of our gear in record time. Nobody spoke much. We were all trying to process what had happened. In the daylight, with the cattle gone, it almost seemed unreal, like a shared hallucination. But Mihai's destroyed tent was very real. So were the deep hoof prints pressed into the soft earth where the bull had charged. We hiked for hours that day, wanting to put as much distance as possible between us and that clearing. We ended up making camp miles away, near a small mountain cabin where a few other hikers were staying. Safety in numbers, we figured. That night, huddled around a new campfire, we tried to joke about it. "Maybe it was the beer we brought," Stefan suggested. "Bull didn't approve of our brand choice." Nobody laughed. "That bull knew what it was doing," Donna said quietly. "It was keeping us there, trapping us." "But why?" Alex asked. "What would be the point?" Nobody had an answer. I've been back to the Carpathians since then, but never to that specific area. I've asked local guides about aggressive bulls, but they just shake their heads. "Bulls can be dangerous," they say, "but what you're describing, that's not normal behavior." I still dream about those eyes sometimes, dark, intelligent, watching me with what I can only describe as hatred. In my dreams, the bull speaks to me, though I can never remember what it says when I wake up. I don't know what happened that day. Maybe it was just a territorial bull protecting its herd. Maybe we camped in a spot that was somehow significant to them. But I can't shake the feeling that there was something more to it, something unnatural about that white bull and the way it trapped us so deliberately. The locals have old stories about mountain spirits taking animal form, about creatures that aren't quite what they seem. I never put much stock in those tales before. Now, I'm not so sure. All I know is that I've never felt more hunted, more targeted than I did under the gaze of that white bull. And sometimes, when I'm hiking and I hear a distant, deep, bellowing echo across the mountains, I freeze, unable to move until the sound fades completely away. Story 3. I still get nervous whenever someone mentions babysitting. It's been almost 3 years, but I can't shake what happened that night. I was 19 then, trying to make extra cash while taking classes at the community college. The Moores seemed like the perfect family to work for. They lived in a nice neighborhood, paid well, and their 5-year-old son Ethan was already asleep by the time I arrived for their standing Friday night date. I'd been babysitting for them for about 4 months. Every Friday, same routine. I'd arrive at 8, Mr. and Mrs. Moore would be dressed up fancy. They always looked so put together. Give me a quick rundown about Ethan being asleep, emergency numbers on the fridge, and they'd be out until around midnight. Easy money, honestly. That Friday started like any other. I remember it was early November, already dark and getting colder. I knocked on their door at 8 sharp. Mrs. Moore answered wearing this gorgeous deep blue dress, pearl earrings catching the light. She always smiled when she saw me, like she was genuinely happy I was there. "Emma, thank you for coming. Ethan's been asleep since 7:30, had a big day at kindergarten. There's leftover lasagna in the fridge if you get hungry." Mr. Moore was adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. He gave me a quick wave. "We shouldn't be too late tonight. Movie and dinner at Vincenzo's." After a few more instructions, they headed out. I did my usual walkthrough, checking that Ethan was sleeping soundly. He was, curled up with his stuffed dinosaur, then settling on the couch with my phone and the TV remote. I put on some reality show with the volume low, scrolled through Instagram, texted my roommate. Normal stuff. Around 9, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Moore's number. "Hey, Mrs. Moore, everything okay?" There was a pause before she answered. "Emma, did you just try to call me?" "No, I didn't. Ethan's fine, still sleeping." "That's odd." Her voice sounded tight. "I just got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, there was just silence. Then they hung up." "Maybe a wrong number?" I suggested, though something about her tone made me uneasy. "Maybe. Anyway, if you need anything, just call. We're just finishing our appetizers." After we hung up, I felt off, like when you think someone's watching you but no one's there. I checked all the locks, peeked in on Ethan again, and tried to focus back on my show. But I kept glancing at my phone, wondering about that silent call. About 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the living room walls. Through the front windows, I could see a car had parked at the curb. Not the Moore's sleek SUV. This was an older sedan, dark color, with what looked like rust spots along the sides. The porch light didn't reach far enough for me to make out details. I moved closer to the window, staying to the side so I wouldn't be obvious. A man got out, average height, wearing what looked like jeans and a dark jacket. He just stood there by the road, staring at the house, not moving toward it, not walking away, just staring. My heart started beating faster. This didn't feel right. The street was quiet. Most houses had lights on, but nobody was outside. The man stood there for maybe a minute, then got back in his car and drove away slowly. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. Probably just looking for an address, I told myself. But I double-checked the locks again anyway. I tried focusing back on the TV, but kept glancing outside. About 5 minutes later, I noticed the same car parked further down the street, partially hidden by the row of maple trees that lined the cul-de-sac. Far enough away that a normal person wouldn't notice, but close enough that he could still see the house. My hands were getting clammy. Should I call the police? But for what? A car parked legally on a public street? I'd look paranoid. Should I call the Moores and say what? Someone's parked near your house and I'm freaking out? I decided to wait. I turned off some of the lights, making it harder for anyone to see in while I could still see out. For the next hour and a half, I kept checking the window. Sometimes the car was there, sometimes it wasn't. It would disappear for 10 minutes, then reappear in a slightly different spot, like he was circling the neighborhood, coming back to check on something. On us. By 11:30, I'd almost convinced myself I was overreacting. The car hadn't been back for about 20 minutes. The movie I'd switched to was almost over. Ethan was still sleeping peacefully, I'd checked on him probably a dozen times just to have something to do. My nerves had settled enough that I was starting to get drowsy on the couch. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound from somewhere in the house. At first, I thought it might be the heating system or the house settling. Old houses make weird noises, right? But then it came again, more distinct this time. It was coming from the back of the house. I muted the TV and listened. Scratch, scratch, a pause, then a different sound, like metal against metal. My blood went cold. Someone was at the back door. I tiptoed to the kitchen, staying low and away from the windows. Through the glass panel in the door, I could make out a dark shape. A person, definitely a person, peering in. Then the doorknob jiggled. He was trying to get in. I backed away, trying not to make any sound. My mind was racing. Ethan was upstairs. My phone was on the couch. The front door was across the house. The scraping got louder. He was using something to try to force the lock. I needed to get Ethan and get out. I crept back through the dining room, staying in the shadows, and made it to the stairs. Each creak of the steps sounded deafening to me. I reached Ethan's room and gently shook him awake. "Ethan, honey, we need to go," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. He was confused, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Emma, where's Mommy?" "She'll meet us. We're going to play a quiet game, okay? Like hide and seek. We need to be very quiet." I wrapped him in his blanket, grabbed his dinosaur, and picked him up. He was still half asleep, thank God, or he might have started asking questions or crying. I held him close and started back down the stairs. That's when I heard another sound from the front of the house. A soft click, then the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. We were trapped between two entry points. I froze on the stairs, holding Ethan tightly against me. Heavy footsteps crossed the threshold into the living room. Through the banister, I could see him, a man, maybe in his 30s, dark hair, ordinary clothes. Nothing remarkable except for what he held in his right hand. A hunting knife, the blade catching the light from the TV. He moved with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. Toward the stairs, toward us. In that moment, something clicked in my brain. The front door was open. That was our only chance. I whispered to Ethan, "Hold on tight to me and don't make a sound," and bolted down the stairs. The man saw us and lunged forward with a shout. I cut left into the living room, putting the couch between us. He changed direction, trying to cut us off from the front door. I feinted right, then darted left again when he committed. It worked. I made it to the door with Ethan clinging to me like a koala, his face buried in my shoulder. I could hear the man right behind us, his breathing heavy, feet pounding on the hardwood. I flew through the front door, down the porch steps, and sprinted to my car parked in the driveway. Fumbling with one hand, I managed to unlock it with my key fob and yanked the back door open, practically throwing Ethan inside. "Get down!" I shouted, slamming the door and racing to the driver's side. The man was at the bottom of the porch steps now. Our eyes met for a second. His were dark, filled with rage. He ran straight for my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and jammed the key in the ignition. The engine caught just as he reached my window, slamming his fist against the glass. I screamed and threw the car into reverse, nearly hitting the mailbox as I backed into the street. He chased us for a few yards before stopping in the middle of the road, watching as I sped away. In my rearview mirror, I saw him walk calmly back toward the house. Once we were a few blocks away, I pulled over, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. I reported everything, then called the Moores. Mrs. Moore answered on the first ring. "Emma, is everything—" "Someone broke in," I blurted out. my voice cracking. "A man with a knife. I have Ethan. We're safe in my car. I called the police." There was a moment of dead silence. Then her voice, cold with fear. "Where are you? We're coming right now." The police arrived at the house before the Moores made it back. By the time we returned, 3 patrol cars were parked outside with flashing lights. The intruder was gone. They found evidence of forced entry at the back door and took fingerprints from both doors and my car window. The Moores arrived minutes later. Mrs. Moore ran to Ethan, clutching him tightly, while Mr. Moore talked with the police. I gave my statement, described the man, the car. I was still shaking. Later, after things had calmed down a bit, Mrs. Moore thanked me, tears in her eyes. "You saved him, Emma. I don't know how to even begin to thank you." But something felt off. The way they exchanged glances, the way Mr. Moore kept asking specific questions about what the man looked like, the way Mrs. Moore wouldn't look directly at me when I described him. They never asked me to babysit again. I got a text the next week thanking me again, but saying they'd made other arrangements for childcare. It felt like they were distancing themselves from me and from what happened. I couldn't let it go. A few weeks later, I did some digging online. Social media searches, public records. What I found gave me chills. Mrs. Moore had been married before to a man named David Saunders. Dark hair, about the right age. Their divorce records mentioned custody disputes over a child, Ethan. There was even a restraining order filed at one point. I never told the Moores what I found, never contacted them again. The police eventually closed the case without an arrest. They said there wasn't enough evidence to pursue charges against anyone specific. But I know what I saw. I know who it was. And sometimes I wonder if the Moores knew too, if that's why they never wanted me back. Maybe they were afraid of what I might figure out, or maybe they just wanted to forget that night ever happened. I still think about Ethan sometimes, whether he remembers any of it, whether he's safe, and I still check my locks twice every night, still flinch when I see headlights through my window, still wake up sometimes thinking I hear that scraping sound at my door. Story 4. I still can't sleep right when I think about what happened to me 3 weeks ago. I've been driving for Lyft for almost 4 years now, mostly night shifts because the roads are quieter and people tend to tip better when they're coming home from bars or late shifts. Plus, I've always been a night owl anyway, so it works for me. My old 2005 Volvo isn't much to look at, but it's reliable and comfortable enough for passengers. Never had any major issues with riders before this. Maybe a few drunk college kids or the occasional rude businessman, but nothing that ever made me genuinely fear for my life. That night started like any other. I'd been driving since around 10 p.m., taking people home from restaurants, bars, picking up night shift workers. Normal stuff. It was a Tuesday night in downtown Riverdale, which is usually pretty quiet compared to weekends. Around 2 in the morning, I got a pickup request from what the app showed as a convenience store on Miller Street. I remember yawning as I accepted it, thinking it would probably be my last ride before heading home. As I drove toward the pickup spot, I started getting this weird feeling in my stomach. You know that sensation when something just feels off? At first, I brushed it off as being tired or hungry. But as I got closer to the convenience store, that feeling got stronger. When I pulled up, I immediately noticed the store was completely dark. Not just closed for the night dark, but empty-looking dark. No lights inside, no cars in the parking lot. The neon open sign was off, and the metal security gate was pulled halfway down. I checked the app again to make sure I was at the right place. Yep, this was definitely it. I remember sitting there for a minute, debating whether to cancel the ride. The store clearly wasn't open, so why would someone request a pickup from here? I was about to tap cancel when I spotted him. There was this guy pacing back and forth in front of the store, partially hidden in the shadows. He was wearing this dirty gray hoodie with the hood pulled up, even though it wasn't particularly cold that night. I could see from my headlights that the hoodie had this big hole in one of the sleeves, and it looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. The guy was moving in this jerky, anxious way, like he couldn't stand still. He kept looking over his shoulder every few seconds, like he thought someone was following him. I should have listened to my gut right then and there. Every instinct was telling me to drive away. But 4 years of driving had conditioned me to pick up whoever requested a ride, and I didn't want to mess up my driver rating. So stupid in retrospect. I pulled up closer, and the app confirmed this was my passenger. Ryan Keller, apparently. He had a 4.8 rating, which seemed high enough to be safe. When he saw my car, he quickly walked over, still doing that weird looking over his shoulder thing. I reluctantly unlocked the doors. The moment he slid into my back seat, I regretted my decision. There was this smell that came with him, not just body odor, but something, chemical, almost like nail polish remover or something. His eyes were bloodshot, and his pupils looked huge, even in the dim light. He was definitely on something. "Hey, how's it going?" I said, trying to sound casual. "Where we headed tonight?" He gave me an address on Oakwood Drive, maybe 15 minutes away. His voice was really deep and raspy, like someone who's smoked 3 packs a day for 20 years. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror and nearly jumped. He was staring right at me intensely, without blinking. Not looking at his phone, not looking out the window, just staring directly at me. I tried to break the awkward silence by turning on the radio. Nothing controversial, just some late-night pop music station. The second I did, he snapped at me. "Turn that off," he said sharply. Not a request, a command. I turned it off immediately. My hands were already getting sweaty on the steering wheel. To calm my nerves, I tried making conversation. "Pretty late to be out, huh? Coming from work or something?" He didn't answer for so long that I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. Then, still staring at me through the rearview mirror, he said, "You ever pick up someone you shouldn't have?" My stomach dropped. What the hell kind of question was that? I forced a nervous laugh. Not that I know of. Most people are pretty normal." That's when he leaned forward slightly, getting closer to the back of my seat. I could feel his presence behind me, and it made the hairs on my neck stand up. "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you," he said. "I could do anything right now, and you wouldn't be able to stop me." My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and tried to focus on driving, running through options in my head. Should I pull over, call 911, try to flag down another car? But what if that made him angry? Then it got even weirder. He started muttering to himself, or maybe to someone who wasn't there. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard phrases like, "I didn't mean it," and "I'm sorry," repeated several times. He'd whisper these things, then go quiet for a minute, then start up again. It sounded like he was apologizing for something he'd done, something terrible. At one point, I heard him clearly say, "It wasn't supposed to go that far." I pretended not to hear any of this. I just kept driving, trying to get to his destination as quickly as possible without breaking the speed limit and attracting police attention. The last thing I wanted was to be pulled over with this guy in my car. We were about 2 minutes from his drop-off point when he suddenly said, "You missed the turn." I hadn't missed any turn. I knew these streets well, and we were going the right way, according to both the GPS and my knowledge of the area. But before I could explain that, he said it again, more forcefully. "You missed the fucking turn. Pull over. Now." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car straight. I was searching for a well-lit place to stop, preferably somewhere with other people around, when I noticed flashing lights in my rear-view mirror. A police car was coming up behind us. The second Ryan saw those lights, his entire demeanor changed. He flattened himself down on the back seat, pressing his body as low as possible. The police car wasn't pulling us over, it was just passing by. But Ryan's reaction was extreme. He was genuinely terrified of the cops. After the police car passed, Ryan sat back up, but he was different now. Agitated, fidgety, clearly wanting to get out of my car immediately. When we reached a red light, he suddenly opened the door and started to get out. "Hey, we're not at your destination yet," I said, surprised. He paused with one foot out the door and looked back at me. His eyes were wild, almost feverish. "You got lucky tonight," he said. "Don't ever pick up from that store again." And then he was gone, disappearing down a side street before I could even process what had happened. I sat there at the green light for a few seconds, my whole body trembling, before someone behind me honked and I automatically started driving again. I went home immediately after that. I couldn't take any more passengers that night. I kept checking my rearview mirror the whole way home, terrified I'd see Ryan following me somehow. When I got to my apartment, I double-checked all the locks and even pushed my dresser in front of the door before I could even attempt to sleep. I reported the incident to Lyft the next morning, but without anything concrete to say. He hadn't physically threatened me or damaged my car. They just noted it and reminded me I could refuse rides if I felt unsafe. Thanks for nothing. For the next few days, I kept obsessively checking local news, half expecting to see Ryan's face connected to some crime. Nothing came up, and I was starting to think maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe he was just a weird guy having a bad night on drugs. Then, exactly 2 weeks after that night, I was scrolling through news on my phone and saw it. Armed robbery at Corner Mart on Jefferson Street. The article described how a man in a gray hoodie had robbed a convenience store at gunpoint around 1:30 in the morning on the same night I'd picked up Ryan. Jefferson Street is only 2 blocks from Miller Street, where I'd picked him up. The security camera photos weren't great, but I recognized that ratty hoodie with the hole in the sleeve. The article said the robber had threatened the clerk with a gun, taken all the cash from the register, and fled on foot. The police believed he might have had an accomplice waiting in a getaway car. I felt physically sick as the realization hit me. I was the getaway driver. That's why the store I picked him up from was closed and empty. It wasn't the actual pickup location. He'd robbed a different store and then ran a couple blocks to throw off any connection before calling a Lyft. Everything made sense now. His nervous behavior, the constant looking over his shoulder, his fear when the police car drove by, his bizarre comments about me picking up someone I shouldn't have, and those mumblings, those apologies. Was he talking about threatening the store clerk? What else had he done that wasn't supposed to go that far? I've been debating whether to go to the police, but what would I say? That I might have given a ride to a robbery suspect? I don't have any concrete evidence, and I'm terrified of potential consequences. What if Ryan finds out I talked to the police? He knows my name, what I look like, what car I drive. He could find me. I haven't driven for Lyft since that night. I can't bring myself to get back in that car and pick up strangers anymore. Every time I think about sitting in that driver's seat with someone behind me, I remember Ryan's words. It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you. I keep thinking about how differently that night could have ended. What if he'd still been high on whatever he was on and decided to hurt me? What if he'd had that gun with him in my car? I was completely vulnerable, and I had no idea. I don't know what to do now. I can't sleep. I keep checking my locks. I keep seeing his face in my rearview mirror, those unblinking eyes staring at me. And I keep wondering if he's out there somewhere, remembering me too. Story 5. I've never been the outdoorsy type in my family. Growing up, I was always the odd one out, the kid who preferred video games and books while everyone else was out hunting, fishing, or camping. My dad tried to get me into it, but it just never clicked. This has made family gatherings particularly awkward, especially the annual Easter celebration at Uncle John's place out in Oak Ridge County. Last Easter, I reluctantly made the 3-hour drive out to his property. I almost made up an excuse not to go, but my mom guilt-tripped me into it. "Family is family, Taylor," she'd said over the phone. "You only see them once a year. You can handle a weekend." Uncle John's house sits on about 40 acres of land, most of it dense woodland. It's this massive 3-story farmhouse that's been in the family for generations, the kind with creaky floorboards and drafty windows, but somehow still charming. As I pulled up the long gravel driveway, I could already see the collection of trucks and SUVs parked haphazardly on the lawn. Great. Everyone was already there. The moment I walked in, I was hit with the usual barrage of questions. Still working that office job? No girlfriend yet? When are you going to learn to hunt? I smiled through gritted teeth, grabbed a beer from the cooler, and tried to blend into the background as much as possible. The house was packed with relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, people I barely remembered from year to year. Kids were running around screaming while the adults broke off into their usual groups. The men talked hunting and fishing in the living room, while the women gathered in the kitchen preparing food and catching up on family gossip. I was standing awkwardly in the hallway when I spotted Kevin, my cousin who's a few years older than me. He was leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone with a look of disinterest that mirrored how I felt. Kevin and I have always gotten along well. He's not as outdoorsy as the rest of them, though he can fake it better than I can. "Hey," I said, approaching him. "How long have you been here?" He looked up and his expression immediately brightened. "Taylor, thank God someone normal. Got here yesterday. Uncle John had me helping set up tables all morning." We caught up for a bit, and I could feel myself relaxing for the first time since arriving. Kevin works in IT in the city, so we at least had something in common to talk about. After about 20 minutes of conversation, he glanced around at the crowded house and lowered his voice. "Want to get out of here for a bit? I'm suffocating." "God, yes," I replied, maybe too eagerly. "Where to?" "I was thinking we could walk the trails in the woods. It's actually nice out today, and it beats listening to Uncle Rick's fishing stories for the 5th time." I hesitated. The woods weren't exactly my idea of an escape, but it was better than staying in the house. "Sure, why not?" We slipped out the back door without anyone noticing. The April air was cool but not cold, and the sun was bright overhead. The woods behind Uncle John's property looked less intimidating in the daylight, with new spring growth starting to show on the trees. "I used to explore these woods all the time as a kid," Kevin said as we approached the tree line. "There's a path that follows an old creek bed. It's easy to walk." I followed him into the forest, immediately noticing how the temperature dropped several degrees under the canopy of trees. The path was barely visible, just a slight depression in the ground where years of footsteps had worn away the underbrush. Kevin walked confidently ahead of me while I kept stumbling over roots and rocks. "How far are we going?" I asked after about 20 minutes of walking. "Not much further," he replied. "There's a small clearing I used to camp at with Uncle John when I was younger." The forest had grown denser the further we walked. The trees towered overhead, blocking most of the sunlight, and the underbrush was thick on either side of the narrow path. I checked my phone, no service, of course. We had been walking for about 40 minutes when I heard it, a rhythmic thudding sound in the distance, like someone hammering nails into wood. Thud, thud, thud. Pause. Thud, thud, thud. "Do you hear that?" I asked Kevin, stopping in my tracks. He froze, listening. "Yeah, sounds like someone's building something." "Out here? In the middle of nowhere?" Kevin shrugged. "Could be someone working on a hunting blind or something. Want to check it out?" I should have said no. Every instinct was telling me to turn back, but curiosity got the better of me. "I guess we could take a quick look." We veered off the path toward the sound, pushing through thick underbrush. The thudding grew louder as we approached, then suddenly stopped altogether. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. "It came from just ahead," Kevin whispered, though I wasn't sure why he was whispering. We emerged into a small clearing and immediately froze. 3 trees at the far end had been defaced in the most disturbing way. Upside-down crosses were nailed high up on their trunks, at least 15 feet off the ground. They weren't small either. Each cross was made of thick branches bound together with some kind of dark cord, and they were positioned in a perfect row across the 3 massive oak trees. "What the fuck?" I muttered, feeling my stomach drop. The crosses were freshly made. The wood was still light-colored where it had been cut. Someone had just put these up, someone who might still be nearby. "We should go," Kevin said quietly, but before we could move, I heard a twig snap to our right. A man stepped out from behind a large tree about 30 feet away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a red and black plaid shirt and work boots. His beard was thick and unkempt, and he carried an axe loosely in one hand. Not a hatchet, but a full-sized wood-cutting axe. Our eyes met, and I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the forest's temperature. His gaze was intense, almost unnaturally focused, and there was something in it that made my skin crawl. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was deep and gravelly, like he didn't use it much. It wasn't shouted or particularly threatening in tone, but the words themselves carried a clear warning. Kevin immediately stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of me. "Sorry, man. We were just hiking and heard some noises. We'll head back now." The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at us. No, staring at me specifically. I couldn't look away from his eyes. They were pale blue, almost colorless in the dim forest light. "Come on," Kevin muttered, grabbing my arm and pulling me back the way we came. We didn't run, but we walked quickly, pushing through the underbrush until we found the path again. Neither of us spoke until we were well away from the clearing. "What the hell was that about?" I finally asked, my voice shaking slightly. "No idea," Kevin replied, looking over his shoulder. "But those crosses, that's some weird shit. Does Uncle John know about people being on his property?" "That's the thing. I'm not even sure if we're still on his land. The property lines out here aren't exactly well marked, but he's never mentioned any neighbors like that." We walked back faster than we had come, constantly checking behind us. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, though I never saw anyone when I looked back. When we finally reached Uncle John's backyard, I felt like I could breathe again. The house looked welcoming now, with smoke coming from the chimney and the sounds of family inside. "Should we tell Uncle John?" I asked as we approached the back porch. Kevin nodded. "Yeah, he should know someone's out there putting up weird shit in the woods." We found Uncle John in the kitchen, helping carry dishes to the dining room for dinner. He's a big man with a perpetually sunburned face and calloused hands from decades of outdoor work. When we pulled him aside and told him what we'd seen, his expression darkened. "What did he look like again?" he asked, after we'd described the crosses and the man. Kevin repeated the description: tall, bearded, plaid shirt, axe. Uncle John shook his head slowly. "That doesn't match any of my neighbors. The closest property is the Hendersons, and they're all short, stocky folks." "Could it be someone trespassing?" I suggested. "Possibly." Uncle John scratched his beard thoughtfully. "There's been some strange activity in these parts lately. Sheriff mentioned something about complaints from other properties. Nothing specific, just people seeing strangers on their land." Kevin's cousin Mark overheard our conversation and immediately suggested they form a group to go investigate. "We've got enough guns in this house to start a small war," he said, with the kind of enthusiasm that made me uncomfortable. Uncle John shut that down quickly. "No one's going anywhere. It'll be dark soon, and I don't want people wandering around the woods at night. I'll call Sheriff Davis in the morning." That seemed to be the end of it. The family gathered for Easter dinner, and no one mentioned the incident except in hushed tones between Kevin and me. But I couldn't get the image of those crosses out of my head, or the way that man had looked at me. I slept poorly that night, tossing and turning in the guest bedroom on the 3rd floor. Around 4:30 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and sat up in bed. The room was freezing despite the heat being on, and I could hear the wind whistling outside the windows. I got up to close the curtains tighter when something caught my eye, a faint, flickering light at the edge of the forest. I moved closer to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass to get a better look. There were torches, actual flaming torches, at the tree line. I counted at least 3, held by dark figures standing just at the edge of the woods. They were perfectly still, facing the house, the flames casting long shadows behind them. My heart racing, I rushed down to Uncle John's room on the 2nd floor and pounded on his door. He answered almost immediately, as if he hadn't been asleep at all. "There are people outside," gasped, "at the edge of the woods, with torches." Uncle John didn't question me. He grabbed his rifle from beside the door and headed downstairs, with me following close behind. By the time we reached the back deck, several other family members had been woken by the commotion and joined us. The figures were still there, motionless, watching. Uncle John raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound was deafening in the pre-dawn quiet. "This is private property," he shouted. "Leave now or I'm calling the sheriff." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if responding to some silent signal, the figures turned in unison and moved back into the forest, their torches disappearing among the trees. Uncle John kept watch for the rest of the night, rifle across his lap as he sat on the back porch. By the time the sun rose, there was no evidence anyone had been there at all. The sheriff came later that morning, but found nothing except some trampled undergrowth at the forest edge. No footprints, no torch remnants, nothing to prove what we'd seen. He promised to increase patrols in the area, but didn't seem particularly concerned. The rest of Easter Sunday was tense. The children weren't allowed to play outside, and everyone kept glancing toward the woods. I left early, making up an excuse about work the next day, but the truth was, I couldn't stand being there anymore. feeling watched from the forest. I've spoken to Uncle John a few times since then. He says there haven't been any more incidents, but he's installed security cameras facing the woods. Kevin and I have talked about it too, trying to make sense of what we saw, but we can't. I still wake up sometimes thinking about those upside-down crosses impossibly high in the trees and the bearded man with the axe. But mostly, I think about those silent figures at the tree line, watching the house in the darkness, watching us. I don't know what they wanted or why they were there. All I know is I'm never going back to those woods again. Story 6. I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, drenched in sweat, thinking I hear that knock on my door. It's been 8 months since I fled that cabin in the Oregon woods, but I can't shake the feeling that something followed me back to civilization. I don't expect anyone to believe what happened to me out there, but I need to write it down. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can make sense of it. After what happened in Portland last year, I couldn't stand to be around people anymore. The constant noise, cars honking, people talking, music blasting, it was like physical pain shooting through my body. My therapist called it severe phonophobia, triggered by trauma. When my cousin offered me his hunting cabin in the Cascades for a few months, I jumped at the chance. The cabin was basic but comfortable. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, living area with a stone fireplace, and a bathroom with actual running water. No internet, spotty cell service, perfect. The drive there was nerve-wracking. The main road eventually turned into gravel, then into what was barely a trail. My little Honda wasn't built for this, and I worried I'd get stuck miles from anywhere. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, it was almost sunset. I remember stepping out of the car and just standing there, letting the silence wash over me. The only sounds were birds calling and wind moving through the pines. I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in months. That first week was exactly what I needed. I'd wake up naturally around 7, make coffee on the little propane stove, and sit on the porch watching the forest come alive. No alarms, no traffic, no neighbors blasting music at all hours. I'd spend my days reading, walking the trails around the cabin, or just sitting by the creek about a quarter mile away. At night, I'd build a fire in the fireplace and fall asleep to the sound of crackling wood and nothing else. My cousin had mentioned there was one other cabin about a half-mile away through the woods, but said the owner rarely visited. Everything changed on my 8th day there. I was chopping firewood that afternoon, still getting used to swinging an axe without looking like a complete idiot, when I heard something that made my heart skip. 3 solid knocks on my front door. Out here, visitors weren't just unexpected, they were impossible. The cabin was at least 15 miles from the nearest small town, down unmarked forest roads. I set the axe down and cautiously approached the door. Standing on my porch was an older woman, probably in her 70s, with long gray hair pulled back in a loose braid. She was wearing a worn canvas jacket and holding a small wicker basket. What struck me immediately were her eyes, a blue so pale and bright they seemed to glow against her weathered skin. "Thomas Marlowe?" she asked. Her voice was surprisingly clear and strong. I nodded, wondering how she knew my name. "I'm Michelle Blackwood. I live just through those trees." She gestured vaguely toward the east. "Thought I should welcome you properly, seeing as we're neighbors now." She held out the basket, which contained homemade preserves, jars of blackberry jam, pickled vegetables, and something that looked like dried mushrooms. "That's very kind of you," I said, taking the basket. "Would you like to come in for coffee or something?" Michelle shook her head firmly. "No, I won't be staying. Just wanted to bring these by and give you some advice." Her expression turned serious. These woods can be dangerous for city folk. Always keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than your axe. Before I could respond to this odd warning, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees with surprising speed for someone her age. I stood there for a moment, basket in hand, feeling unsettled. There was something about her visit that didn't sit right with me, but I chalked it up to my social anxiety after weeks of isolation. That night, a massive thunderstorm rolled in. The rain hammered against the cabin roof so hard I thought it might cave in. Lightning flashed continuously, briefly illuminating the woods outside my windows in stark, eerie glimpses. I'd built up the fire and was trying to focus on my book when I heard it again, frantic knocking at my door. I opened it to find Michelle standing there, completely soaked. "You need to be careful," she said without preamble. "I saw someone by your woodpile just now, a man." "What? In this storm?" I looked past her into the darkness, seeing nothing but sheets of rain. "Are you sure?" "I know what I saw," she snapped. "Keep your doors locked tonight." Then, just as before, she turned and disappeared into the downpour. After she left, I grabbed a flashlight and my axe and cautiously checked around the cabin. The rain was coming down so hard I could barely see, but there was no sign that anyone had been near my woodpile. As I went back inside, something occurred to me that sent a chill down my spine. Michelle said she'd seen someone by my woodpile just now, but her cabin was supposedly a half-mile away through dense forest. How could she have seen anything from there, especially in this weather? And how had she gotten to my cabin so quickly? I double-checked all the locks and wedged a chair under the doorknob for good measure. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the storm through the windows and jumping at every crack of thunder. Around 3 in the morning, during a brief lull in the rain, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and that's when I saw her. Michelle was standing at the edge of the woods, just past my woodpile. She wasn't moving, just staring directly at my cabin. In the next flash of lightning, she was gone. I didn't sleep at all that night. When morning came, the storm had moved on, leaving behind a clean, washed feeling in the air. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined seeing Michelle. Maybe the isolation was getting to me after all. I spent the day on edge, jumping at every sound. I called my cousin to ask about Michelle Blackwood, but he said he didn't know of any permanent residents nearby, just other vacation cabins that were rarely used. I tried to tell myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she owned one of those cabins, and my cousin just didn't know her. That night, I fell into an exhausted sleep around midnight, only to be jerked awake by more knocking, louder this time, more insistent. The digital clock by my bed read 2:17 a.m. I grabbed the axe from beside my bed and crept to the door. "Who's there?" I called out. No answer, just more knocking. "Michelle?" I tried again. The knocking stopped. Then a man's voice, deep and rough, called back, "Open the door, friend. I need help. My truck broke down." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I peeked through the window beside the door and saw him, a massive man with a shaved head and thick beard. He was wearing a flannel jacket and jeans, looking like a typical outdoorsman, but there was something wrong about his eyes. They seemed flat, empty. "I'll call someone for you," I offered, though we both knew cell service was nearly non-existent. "There's a town about 15 miles east." "Open the goddamn door!" he shouted, slamming his fist against it so hard the whole cabin seemed to shake. I backed away, clutching the axe. "I'm calling the police," I yelled, hoping he wouldn't call my bluff. That's when he started ramming the door with his shoulder. The cabin was old, the door frame not particularly sturdy. It took him 3 tries before the wood splintered and he burst in. What happened next still feels like a nightmare. Instead of attacking me, he started destroying the cabin. He flipped the table, smashed chairs against the wall, pulled books from shelves, and ripped them apart, all while screaming incoherently. I stood frozen in the bedroom doorway, axe raised, unable to comprehend what was happening. When he grabbed a kerosene lamp and smashed it against the wall, I finally snapped out of my paralysis. I ran for the back door, fumbling with the lock as I heard him stomping toward the bedroom. Once outside, I sprinted for the woods, not caring about direction, just needing to get away. I ran until my lungs burned, then collapsed behind a fallen tree. From there, I could see the faint glow of my cabin's lights through the trees. I watched in horror as more lights appeared, flashlights, moving around the property. There were more of them out there. I stayed hidden for hours, shivering in the cold night air, too terrified to move. When dawn finally broke, I heard vehicles arriving. Peering cautiously from my hiding spot, I saw 2 police cruisers pulled up to my cabin. I almost cried with relief. The officers were shocked when I emerged from the woods, filthy and wild-eyed. They explained that a forest ranger had spotted smoke from the road and called it in. The kerosene lamp had started a small fire, but it hadn't spread beyond one wall. As they took my statement, I insisted we check on Michelle. She warned me, I kept saying. She knew something was going to happen. The older officer exchanged a look with his partner but agreed to drive me to where I thought her cabin was located. We walked for about 20 minutes before finding it, and that's when everything I thought I knew fell apart. The cabin was there, but it was clearly abandoned. The roof had partially collapsed. Windows were broken or missing entirely, and the door hung off its hinges. Inside was nothing but rotting furniture and animal droppings. No one had lived there for decades. "This is impossible," I whispered, touching the thick layer of dust on what remained of a table. "I saw her just yesterday. She gave me preserves." The officers looked concerned, not about Michelle, but about me. They suggested I might have been hallucinating due to stress or isolation. One even gently asked if I'd been taking any medications or recreational substances. When we returned to my cabin, more police had arrived. They'd found evidence of the break-in and the destruction, but no sign of the bald man or anyone else. The basket Michelle had given me was gone too. I packed my things that same day. The officers helped board up the broken door and windows, and one followed me all the way back to the main road to make sure I got out safely. I never returned to the cabin. For months afterward, I obsessed over what had happened. Was Michelle a ghost? Some kind of forest spirit? Had she been trying to warn me or lure me into danger? And who was the bald man? What did he want? I even hired a private investigator who discovered that a woman named Michelle Blackwood had indeed lived in that cabin 50 years ago. She disappeared under mysterious circumstances after her husband was found dead in their home, his body mutilated. The case was never solved. Sometimes I wonder if she saved me that night, if her warning about keeping windows shut and lanterns full had been meant to protect me from whatever came knocking. Other times, I'm convinced she was working with them somehow, watching me, learning my routine. The most terrifying thought, the one that keeps me awake most nights, is what if she wasn't warning me about the bald man at all? What if she was warning me about something else out there in those woods, something that even she was afraid of? I don't know what happened in those woods. I don't know why they targeted me or what they wanted. All I know is that I still check my locks 3 times before bed, and I never, ever answer unexpected knocks at my door. Story 7. I still can't run at night anymore. even with streetlights, even with people around. I've tried a few times over the years, but the panic sets in. That feeling of being watched, of something reaching for me from the shadows. I know how it sounds, but what happened that night in Shell Point wasn't just some random scare. Something was down there, something that knew where I lived. This happened when I was 15, back in Shell Point, where my family had our house on Surf Avenue. It's this small coastal town that's packed during summer, but practically dead the rest of the year. We were just a block from the beach, and I could see the ocean from my bedroom window. Most kids would have loved that, but honestly, I was kind of over it by then. When you grow up with something, it stops being special, you know. Anyway, I was on the cross-country team at school, and I took it pretty seriously. Maybe too seriously. During off-season, when the town emptied out, I'd go for these late-night runs along the boardwalk. My parents weren't thrilled about it, but they figured Shell Point was safe enough, especially when the tourists were gone. Plus, I was a good kid. Straight A's, never got into trouble. So they let me go as long as I was back by 10. That night, it was a Wednesday in November, I headed out around 8:30. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and there was this heavy mist coming off the ocean. The kind that doesn't soak you but makes everything feel damp. I remember wearing my gray running shorts, a long-sleeve thermal, and this neon yellow windbreaker my mom insisted on because of visibility. I didn't bring my phone, never did on these runs. It was just me, my Garmin watch, and my house keys on this little metal ring. I liked running at night precisely because nobody was around. The boardwalk stretched for about 2 miles, and during those off-season evenings, it was completely empty. Just the sound of waves crashing beneath and my shoes hitting the wooden planks. It was peaceful, normal. I'd done about 1.5 miles when I heard it, this tiny metallic clink, followed by a softer thud underneath me. I stopped immediately. It took me a second to realize what had happened, but when I reached into my pocket, my keys were gone. They must have fallen through one of the cracks in the boardwalk. My stomach dropped. My dad was super strict about responsibility, and losing the house keys would have earned me a week of being grounded at minimum. Plus, he'd make me pay for changing the locks. So I backtracked a few steps to where I thought I'd heard the sound and knelt down to look between the wooden slats. It was almost completely dark under there. The boardwalk sits about 4 feet off the sand, creating this long, shadowy space underneath that stretches the entire length. During the day, it's just an area where seagulls hide and trash collects. At night, well, it's something else entirely. I activated the backlight on my Garmin, but it barely illuminated anything. I could see a bit of damp sand directly below me, but no keys. I knew I had to go under the boardwalk to find them. There was a gap in the wooden barrier about 20 yards back where I could slip through. The smell hit me first when I ducked under, this mix of rotting seaweed, stale beer, and something else I couldn't quite place, something sour. The space was even darker than I'd expected, and the ceiling of wooden planks above made it feel claustrophobic. I had to hunch over to avoid hitting my head. Water dripped somewhere nearby, and waves crashed in the distance. My watch's blue backlight created more shadows than actual visibility. I spent maybe 10 minutes feeling around in the sand where I thought my keys might have fallen. The cold, wet sand stuck to my fingers as I dug small holes, hoping to hear that metallic sound again. Nothing. It was useless. I couldn't see anything, and the area where they could have fallen was too large to search blindly. I decided to try a different approach. I went back up to the boardwalk and found the exact spot where I thought I'd dropped them. I unlaced one of my running shoes and dangled the shoelace through the crack, thinking I could use it as a marker to pinpoint the location from below. That's when it happened. As I was about to stand up, the shoelace suddenly pulled downward, like someone had tugged it from below. Not a gentle movement from the wind, but a sharp, deliberate pull. I yanked my hand back so fast I scraped my knuckles on the wood. My heart was hammering. There was someone under the boardwalk. For a few seconds, I just froze there, crouched on the planks, trying to process what had just happened. My first thought was that it must be some homeless person who'd taken shelter there for the night. But then I realized that whoever it was now had my house keys, with our address engraved right on the little metal tag my mom had attached to them. I know what you're thinking. Any sane person would have just run home and told their parents. Get the locks changed, problem solved. But I wasn't thinking clearly. I was 15, scared of getting in trouble, and convinced I could handle it myself. Plus, there was this stubborn part of me that thought maybe I'd imagined the tug on the shoelace. Maybe it had just slipped through my fingers. So I made the stupidest decision of my life. I decided to go back under. This time, the space under the boardwalk felt different, heavier somehow. The air seemed thicker and the darkness more complete. I swear the temperature dropped several degrees. I stood just inside the entrance, letting my eyes adjust and listening intently. That's when I heard it, a shuffling sound coming from my right. Then another from somewhere behind me. Not just one person, several people moving around in the darkness. I could hear their breathing, these soft, raspy inhales and exhales that didn't sound quite normal. I knew immediately I'd made a terrible mistake. I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, something cold wrapped around my ankle. Fingers, at least they felt like fingers, gripped my skin, and I felt fingernails digging in. They weren't just holding me, they were piercing my skin. I didn't think. I just reacted, kicking backward as hard as I could. I felt my foot connect with something solid, and the grip loosened. I burst out from under the boardwalk and ran like I've never run before. My ankle was burning where those fingers had grabbed me, but the adrenaline pushed me forward. I didn't look back once during that mile sprint home. By the time I reached our front door, I was hyperventilating. I didn't have my keys, so I had to ring the doorbell, which brought my confused parents to the door. One look at my face, and my dad knew something was seriously wrong. When I managed to tell them what happened, well, most of it, I left out the part about going back under the second time. My mom called the police while my dad checked my ankle. There were 5 distinct scratches wrapped around my ankle, each one deep enough to draw blood. They formed a perfect handprint, 5 fingers that had dug into my skin. While we waited for the police, my dad cleaned the wounds, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was rattled. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. They took my statement and then sent a car to check out the boardwalk. They found nothing, of course. No people, no evidence of anyone having been there. They suggested it might have been some teenagers messing around or possibly homeless individuals seeking shelter. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, but didn't seem overly concerned. My parents had the locks changed the very next day. My dad didn't even mention making me pay for it. For the next week, one of them drove me to and from school, and my night runs were indefinitely suspended. The scratches on my ankle got infected despite the antibiotic cream, and I ended up needing a tetanus shot at the doctor's office. The marks took weeks to heal, completely, and I still have faint scars. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. But 4 days after the incident, around 6 in the morning, there was a knock at our front door. My dad went to answer it, with me hovering nervously behind him. When he opened the door, there was nobody there, just my missing shoelace placed neatly on the welcome mat. We installed a security system that weekend. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. Nothing else happened for the remaining 3 years we lived in that house. But I never went running at night again. I never even went near the boardwalk alone. I'm 23 now and living in a city hundreds of miles from Shell Point. My parents still own that house. They rent it out during tourist season. Sometimes I wonder if the tenants ever notice anything strange, if they ever hear scratching at the door at night or find items that should be inside somehow placed on the doorstep. I still don't know what was under that boardwalk. I don't know how many of them there were or what they wanted, but I do know this. They found my shoelace. They knew exactly which house was mine. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night in my apartment with that feeling of being watched, I wonder if they're still out there, waiting, remembering, just like I am. Story 8. I'm still shaking as I type this. I've been debating whether to share this experience for days, but I need to get it off my chest, and maybe it'll help someone else stay safe. So I'm big into LARPing, live-action role-playing, have been for years. For those who don't know, it's basically like a giant medieval fantasy cosplay where everyone stays in character and acts out adventures together in the woods. I've always felt so safe in the LARP community. It's where I met my fiancée Alex and most of my closest friends. This happened just last weekend at the Elderwood Forest event. It was supposed to be a 3-day medieval fantasy LARP that I'd been looking forward to for months. Alex and I drove up with our friend Morgan on Friday morning. We were all excited, joking around in the car, stopping for snacks, normal road trip stuff. I remember feeling so happy when we pulled into the campground. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, and the forest looked beautiful. After checking in with the event organizers, we headed to our assigned camping area to set up. We had 2 tents, one for Alex and me and one for Morgan. Alex and Morgan went to set up Morgan's tent first, while I started on ours. I was about halfway done when I noticed this guy watching me from maybe 20 feet away. At first I tried to ignore him, thinking he was just passing by. But then he walked over, and something about him immediately set off alarm bells. He was a big guy, like really overweight with a patchy beard that only grew on his neck. He was wearing what looked like a hastily thrown together costume, just a basic brown tunic that was too small for him and some regular jeans. He didn't fit the medieval aesthetic at all. "You here alone?" That was literally the first thing he said to me. Not hello or nice to meet you, just straight to asking if I was alone. I said, "No, my fiancé and friend are just setting up another tent nearby." I pointed in their direction, hoping he'd take the hint. He introduced himself as Greg and asked if this was my first event. I told him I'd been LARPing for 5 years, and we started talking about games. I mentioned I was into video games too, and that's when things got weird. "Oh, I bet you play casual stuff like Animal Crossing," he said with this condescending smirk. I said I actually play all kinds of games, including Ark Survival, which I've put thousands of hours into. This guy immediately started explaining Ark to me like I was a complete novice. Well, in Ark, you have to tame dinosaurs by knocking them out and feeding them specific foods. I nodded and said, "Yeah, I know. I've tamed pretty much everything in the game." He completely ignored me and continued, "The T-Rex is the strongest dinosaur and the only one worth taming for PvP." This was just flat out wrong, so I said, "Actually, Gigas are stronger for PvP. and Rexes aren't even in the top 5 for boss fights if you're using the right creatures. His face got all red, and he cut me off with, "I've been playing since launch. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about." I was getting uncomfortable, so I made an excuse about needing to finish setting up before the opening ceremony. He finally left, but kept looking back at me as he walked away. Later that evening, after the opening ceremony and first quest, our group was sitting around a campfire. There were about 8 of us just chatting in character about the kingdom's problems and our plans for the next day. Then Greg appeared out of nowhere and sat down right next to me on the log. Everyone kind of exchanged looks because none of us knew him. He wasn't even really in character. He kept referencing real-world stuff when everyone else was talking about dragons and magic. Every time I shifted away from him on the log, he'd scoot closer within minutes. I got up to get more mead, actually just water in a fancy bottle, and sat in a different spot between Alex and Morgan. Greg actually got up and tried to squeeze into the non-existent space on the other side of me. Someone in our group finally said, "Sir, you're breaking immersion with your talk of the outside realm. Perhaps you should join another group more suited to your interests." It was a polite way of asking him to leave since he wasn't playing by the rules. Greg stood up and glared at me specifically, not the person who spoke to him, and stormed off muttering something about gatekeeping bitches. I tried to brush it off, but I was genuinely uncomfortable. Alex asked if I was okay, and I told him about the earlier interaction. He said he'd stay with me from then on, but the next day we had different guild missions, so we had to separate for a few hours. Saturday morning, I was on a quest to gather magical herbs, basically colored ribbons tied to trees, along one of the forest trails. I was alone because my character was a ranger, and this was supposed to be a solo tracking mission. I'd found about half the ribbons I needed when I rounded a bend in the trail, and there was Greg, just standing in the middle of the path. My stomach dropped. There was no one else around, and the trail was narrow with thick brush on both sides. He was blocking the way forward, and I didn't want to turn my back on him to go back the way I came. "Hey, Emily," he said, using my real name instead of my character name, which is another LARP no-no. "Fancy meeting you here. I was just about to head back to camp for some coffee. You should join me." I tried to stay calm and said, "Thanks, but I need to finish my quest. The guild is counting on these herbs." That's when he stepped toward me and grabbed my arm, not super hard, but firmly enough that I couldn't easily pull away. "Come on," he said. "It's just coffee. Besides, you and me alone in the woods together sounds like the perfect scenario." The way he said perfect scenario made my skin crawl. I yanked my arm away and said I had to go. Then I literally ran past him down the trail toward the main village area where I knew there would be other people. I kept looking over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following me. When I got to the village, I was out of breath and shaking. I found some people from another guild I was friendly with and stuck with them for the rest of the day. I told Alex what happened when we met up for lunch, and he was furious. He wanted to report Greg right away, but I convinced him to wait until the evening because I didn't want to ruin the big battle that was planned for that afternoon. That night, after the battle, we had a feast and celebration in the main hall. Greg was there, but he stayed on the other side of the room, just staring at me. It was so creepy, but at least there were tons of people around. Around 11 at night, I needed to use the bathroom. The campground had actual restroom facilities, but they were about a 2-minute walk from the hall. Alex offered to come with me, but I said I'd be fine since the path was well lit and there were other people walking around. I used the bathroom and was walking back when Greg jumped out from behind some bushes near the path. It happened so fast, I didn't even have time to scream. He pushed me against a tree, one hand on my shoulder and the other arm against the tree above my head, blocking me in. "Why are you being such a tease?" he hissed. His breath smelled like beer and his face was inches from mine. "I see you holding hands with that guy all day, but when I show interest, you run away? You're leading me on." I was terrified. I said, "I'm not leading you on. That's my fiancé. Please let me go." "Just give me a chance," he said, his voice getting louder. "Just a little kiss. That's all I'm asking for." When I said no, he tried to force himself on me. He pressed his body against mine and tried to kiss me. I turned my head and screamed as loud as I could. What happened next was almost surreal. Within seconds, about 10 people from our LARP group came running down the path, still in full costume, still holding their foam weapons. They pulled Greg off me, and 2 of the bigger guys held him, while someone ran to get the event organizer. I was crying and shaking. Alex wrapped me in his arms while we waited for the organizer to arrive. When the organizer got there, Greg tried to claim I had been flirting with him all weekend and led him on. Thankfully, multiple people spoke up about his previous behavior. The organizer told Greg to pack his things and leave immediately. He was permanently banned from all future events run by that organization. 2 of the staff members actually stood watch while he packed up and then escorted him to his car to make sure he left the property. I spent the rest of the night in our tent with Alex and Morgan, taking turns sitting outside just to make me feel safe. We ended up leaving early Sunday morning instead of staying for the final day. I'm still processing everything that happened. What scares me most is how quickly things escalated from creepy comments to physical assault. If I hadn't screamed when I did, or if no one had been close enough to hear, I don't even want to think about it. I've been LARPing for years and never felt unsafe until now. I'm not sure when I'll feel comfortable going to another event. What started as an exciting weekend with friends turned into the most terrifying experience of my life, all because of one guy who couldn't take no for an answer. The worst part is, I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering if I did something to encourage him. Did I not shut him down firmly enough at the beginning? Should I have reported him after the trail incident? I know logically that this wasn't my fault, but I can't help second-guessing myself. I'm sharing this as a warning. Trust your instincts. If someone makes you uncomfortable, tell someone right away. Don't worry about making a scene or being dramatic. I'm just grateful I got away with only emotional scars, but I know it could have been so much worse. Story 9. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. It happened 2 summers ago when I was 16, and I still get chills thinking about it. My friends and I discovered something in the woods we shouldn't have, and I'm convinced someone, or something, didn't want us there. There were 4 of us: me, Jake, my best friend since elementary, Mia, and Tyler. We were bored out of our minds that July, like every teenager in our small town. Jake's house backed up to this massive stretch of woods that we'd explored plenty of times before, but never too deep because his mom was paranoid about us getting lost. That Friday, Jake's parents left for an overnight trip to visit his grandma. Freedom. We all crashed at his place, and after lunch, Jake mentioned he'd spotted something weird in the woods a couple weeks back when he was out walking his dog. "It's like some old concrete building or something," he said between bites of his sandwich. "Looks super abandoned. We should check it out." I remember how excited I felt. Our boring summer day suddenly had purpose. We packed some snacks, filled our water bottles, and Jake grabbed his dad's multi-tool just because. I had my phone with a decent flashlight app, and Mia brought her Bluetooth speaker because she insisted everything was better with music. We entered the woods around 2 in the afternoon. The temperature dropped immediately as we got under the tree cover, which was a relief from the summer heat. Jake led us down this barely there path, and we had to duck under branches and step over fallen logs. The mosquitoes were relentless. After hiking for maybe 30 minutes, much farther than we'd ever gone before, the trees started thinning out, and we came upon this weird clearing. And there it was. The structure wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a full building, just these concrete walls about chest height forming a rough rectangle, maybe 15 by 20 feet. No roof, completely open to the sky. The walls had crumbled in some places, creating these gap openings besides the main entrance. The concrete was covered in moss and these weird stains that looked almost rust-colored in places. "What do you think this was?" Mia asked, running her hand along one of the walls. "Bomb shelter, maybe?" Tyler suggested. "Or some kind of foundation for a house that never got built." About 20 feet away from the main structure was this circular pit, maybe 6 feet across, filled with old bricks and what looked like broken pieces of concrete. The whole place had this heavy feeling to it, like the air was thicker somehow. Jake was the first to step inside through the main opening. "Guys, we should totally claim this as our hangout spot. No one knows it's here." The idea caught on immediately. We spent the next few hours clearing out the space, removing fallen branches, kicking aside old leaves, and making it ours. Tyler found a flat piece of concrete and announced it would be our table. I arranged some logs as makeshift seats. Mia collected some rocks to make a fire pit in the center. As the afternoon wore on, the sun started to dip behind the trees. The temperature dropped, and we decided to light the fire. Jake had brought matches, and we gathered dry wood from around the area. Before long, we had a decent fire going, and the ruins took on this warm orange glow that made the place feel cozy rather than creepy. We sat around the fire, sharing stories and passing around a bag of chips. Mia played some music, but kept it low. We were deep in the woods, but still felt like we needed to be careful. For a while, everything was perfect. I remember thinking this would be one of those high school memories we'd talk about years later. Around 7:30, nature called. I stood up and announced I needed to pee. "Just go behind the wall," Jake suggested. "No way," I said. "I'm gonna head back toward your house a bit." I wasn't about to do my business right next to where we were hanging out. I grabbed my phone for the flashlight. The sun hadn't completely set yet, but the woods were already dark under the tree cover. "Don't get lost," Mia called after me. "I'll follow the path," I assured her. "Be back in 5. I left our little sanctuary and headed into the trees. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees as soon as I left the warmth of the fire. I walked maybe 100 yards, following the trampled path we'd made earlier, until I was well out of sight and earshot of my friends. After finding a suitable tree and handling my business, I turned to head back. That's when I heard it for the first time, footsteps crunching on leaves somewhere behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps stopped too. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. I convinced myself it was just an animal, a deer maybe, and started walking again. Immediately the footsteps resumed, matching my pace but staying behind me. I stopped again. The footsteps stopped. My heart was hammering against my ribs now. This wasn't an echo. This wasn't my imagination. Something was mimicking my movements. I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight between the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trunks and underbrush, but nothing else. No eyes reflecting back, no movement. Jake? Tyler? This isn't funny, I called out, hoping it was just my friends playing a prank. Deep down, I knew they were all still back at the ruins. I started walking again, faster this time, no longer caring about being quiet. The footsteps behind me picked up pace too, getting louder, more deliberate. They sounded human, the distinct sound of boots on forest floor, but something was off about the rhythm. It was like whoever was following me was taking exaggerated steps, trying too hard to sound normal. Panic set in. I broke into a run, sprinting back toward the ruins, branches whipping at my face. The footsteps behind me turned into running too, keeping pace, but never getting closer or farther away. I burst into the clearing, gasping for breath, eyes wide with fear. My 3 friends looked up from the fire, startled by my sudden entrance. "Whoa, what happened?" Jake asked, standing up immediately. There's someone out there," I panted, pointing back toward the woods. "Following me, copying my steps." "What do you mean?" Tyler asked, looking skeptical. "Someone's in the woods. They were following me. When I stopped, they stopped. When I walked, they walked." "Dude, it was probably just an echo," Tyler said, but he looked uneasy. "Or a deer," Mia added, but she was already gathering her backpack. "It wasn't an echo," I insisted. "It was footsteps, heavy ones." Jake looked concerned. "Maybe we should head back anyway. It's getting dark." As we debated what to do, we all heard it at the same time, a metallic scraping sound from just outside the concrete walls, like metal dragging across concrete. We froze, staring at each other wide-eyed. The sound came again, closer this time, from a different section of wall. "What the hell is that?" Mia whispered. Before anyone could answer, something hit the outside of the wall with force. A dull thud followed by that same scraping sound, like someone was running a piece of metal along the perimeter. "Put out the fire," Jake hissed. "Now!" We scrambled to kick dirt onto the flames, plunging ourselves into near-total darkness. The only light came from the dim glow of the dying embers and the moon filtering through the trees. "We need to get out of here," Tyler whispered, "but not through the main entrance." He was right. Whatever was out there seemed to be circling the structure, and the main entrance was too obvious. Instead, we each chose one of the gaps in the walls where the concrete had crumbled. "On 3, Jake whispered. 1, 2, 3. We bolted in different directions, squeezing through the gaps in the walls. I scraped my arm on the rough concrete but barely felt it. Adrenaline had taken over completely. Once outside, we regrouped and started running through the underbrush, away from the path, crashing through the woods in a blind panic. Behind us, I could hear movement, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and knew we were being pursued. "Don't look back," Jake yelled. "Just run." We ran like hell, stumbling over roots and rocks in the darkness. My lungs burned and branches scratched at my face and arms, but pure fear kept me moving. I could hear Mia crying as she ran beside me. After what felt like forever, we broke through the tree line and onto the gravel road that ran along the edge of the woods, about a quarter-mile from Jake's house. We stopped, doubled over and gasping for breath. "Did we lose it?" Tyler panted. That's when I looked back at the woods we'd just escaped from. There, standing at the edge of the trees, was a figure, tall and still, wearing what looked like a dark hooded sweatshirt or jacket, just watching us. "Guys," I whispered, nudging Jake. We all turned to look. The figure didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there silently at the boundary between woods and road. "Let's go," Jake said quietly. "Now." We backed away slowly, then turned and ran the rest of the way to Jake's house. We locked every door and window, pulled all the blinds and huddled in the living room with every light turned on. We talked about calling the police, but what would we say? That we trespassed on some abandoned structure in the woods and someone scared us. That we were being followed by a person who didn't actually threaten or approach us. It seemed ridiculous in the safety of Jake's house. We stayed up most of the night, jumping at every sound. By morning, we'd convinced ourselves it was probably just some homeless person who used the ruins as shelter, or maybe another teenager playing a prank. But I knew better. The methodical way those footsteps had followed me, the deliberate scraping on the concrete walls, the silent figure at the edge of the woods. It wasn't normal human behavior. We never went back to the ruins. Jake's parents returned the next day, and we never told them what happened. A few weeks later, before school started, I asked Jake if he wanted to go into the woods again. Not to the ruins, just for a hike. He refused, and I saw real fear in his eyes. Sometimes I think about going back in daylight with more people to see if the ruins are still there or if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the sound of those footsteps matching mine, stopping when I stopped, and the hooded figure standing motionless at the edge of the woods. Whatever was in those woods that night, it knew we were there. It hunted us. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my window that stop whenever I stop moving. Story 10. I still lose sleep over this, and it's been 20 years. I don't know if writing it out will help, but I need to tell someone. Maybe one of you will have answers. When I was 8, my family spent every summer at my grandparents' beach house in Dune Harbor. It was this old 2-story place with weathered shingles and creaky floorboards, but to us kids, it was paradise. My brother Max and I would share the sunroom that had been converted into a bedroom, with these massive sliding glass doors that led straight to the wooden boardwalk connecting to the beach. The summer this happened, the town had just finished building these huge sand dunes along the shoreline. They were supposed to protect the houses from hurricane damage, but to us, they looked like castle walls or something out of Star Wars. They completely changed how the beach looked. You couldn't just walk straight from the boardwalk to the water anymore. You had to climb up these steep sand hills and down the other side. It was late July, probably around 2002. The whole extended family was there. My parents, grandparents, aunt, uncle, and cousins. I remember it was a Thursday because we always had seafood on Thursdays, and I still had the smell of fried clams on my fingers. Max and I had gotten into this huge fight earlier. I can't even remember what it was about. Probably something stupid like him breaking one of my action figures or me touching his Game Boy. But I was furious. I remember lying in bed that night, stewing in anger while Max snored in the bed next to mine. It must have been around 10:30 when I decided to sneak out. Everyone else was asleep or watching TV in the living room. I quietly slid open the glass door, wincing at every little sound it made on the track. The salt air hit me immediately, that mix of ocean and sand that's like nothing else. I wasn't planning to go far. In my 8-year-old brain, I was just going to sit on the boardwalk for a while and cool off. Maybe there'd be some teenagers or locals hanging out that I could watch from a distance. Usually there were at least a few people walking around at night. But that night, the boardwalk was completely empty. No couples holding hands, no fishermen heading home, nobody. The wooden planks stretched out in both directions, illuminated by these dim yellow lights that were spaced way too far apart. The emptiness felt weird, but I didn't turn back. I walked for maybe 5 minutes away from our house and toward the public beach access. That's when I noticed it, smoke rising from beyond one of the big dunes. At first, I thought it was just sea mist or something, but the smell was unmistakable. Someone had a fire going. I should have gone back. Even now, 20 years later, I still replay that moment and wish I'd just turned around. But I was 8, angry at my brother, and curious. So I kept walking until I reached the wooden steps that led up to the top of the dune. The sand was cool between my toes as I climbed. I remember how much harder it was to walk in the deep sand, how my feet sank with each step. When I reached the top, I could see down to the beach on the other side. There was a bonfire burning, maybe 30 feet from the water's edge. Not a huge one, but definitely big enough that it shouldn't have been left unattended. And that's what struck me as odd. There was nobody around it. No chairs, no coolers, no towels, nothing that would indicate people had been there and just stepped away for a minute. Just this fire, burning alone on an empty beach. I stood there for probably a full minute, scanning the shoreline in both directions. Not a soul in sight. The waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, and the fire crackled, and that was it. No voices, no distant music, nothing. I don't know why, but I decided to go down to the fire. Maybe I thought it was dangerous to leave it burning. Maybe I was just bored and looking for adventure. Whatever the reason, I half slid, half ran down the dune toward it. Up close, the fire was smaller than it had looked from the top of the dune, but still concerning. I knew fires weren't allowed on the beach without permits, and definitely not unattended. So I started kicking sand onto the edges, gradually working my way around and inward until the flames died down to embers and then nothing but smoke. That's when I noticed the stuff. Around where the fire had been, partially buried in the sand, were clothes. Kids' clothes. A small blue t-shirt with a rocket ship on it. A pair of khaki shorts. One single sneaker. The kind with Velcro straps that little kids wear. My first thought was that someone had forgotten their beach stuff and it caught fire accidentally. But as I looked closer, I realized the clothes were deliberately placed in the fire. They were burned in specific places, not randomly like they would be if they'd just fallen in. I kept looking around and found more stuff scattered nearby. A couple of toy cars, a baseball cap, and photos. That's what really freaked me out. There were partially burned photographs scattered in the sand. Most were too damaged to make out, just blackened paper with maybe a corner or edge still intact. But one had only been singed around the edges. I picked it up and brushed away the sand. It was a picture of a boy about my age, dark hair like mine, similar build. He was standing on a beach that could have been Dune Harbor or any coastal town, really. But what made my stomach drop was how much he looked like me. Not identical, but enough that it could have been my school photo from the year before. I dropped the photo like it had burned my fingers. Something was very wrong. Why would someone burn children's clothes and photos? And why was there a picture of a kid who looked so much like me? That's when I heard it. A man's voice calling from down the beach. Hey, hey you! I whipped around toward the sound. Maybe 100 yards down the beach, a figure was walking toward me. No, not walking, staggering, like he was drunk or injured. What are you doing there? The voice called. Something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. I squinted to see better in the darkness. It was definitely a man. Tall, with a bald head that reflected the moonlight. He was wearing dark clothes and moving with this jerky, unpredictable gait. "Don't you go anywhere," he shouted, and started moving faster toward me. I didn't think twice. I bolted toward the dune, my heart hammering in my chest. The sand made running nearly impossible. My feet kept sinking and sliding. I could hear him behind me, moving faster now, his breathing getting louder. "Come back here. I just want to talk to you." but there was something in his voice that told me he wanted more than talking. I reached the base of the dune and started climbing, clawing at the sand with my hands to pull myself up faster. I was almost at the top when I felt it, fingernails scraping against my ankle. He had reached the dune behind me and made a grab for my foot. I kicked backward wildly, my foot connecting with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and the grip on my ankle loosened just enough for me to scramble the rest of the way up. I didn't look back. I tumbled down the other side of the dune, rolling and sliding in the sand until I hit the boardwalk. Then I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, all the way back to our beach house. By some miracle, no one had noticed I was gone. The sliding door was still cracked open where I'd left it. I slipped back inside, closed it silently, and dove into my bed. I was covered in sand, my heart racing so fast I thought it might explode. I pulled the covers up to my chin and lay there, paralyzed with fear, listening for the sound of someone following me on the boardwalk. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak of the old house, every distant sound had me thinking the bald man had somehow found where I was staying. The next morning, I checked my ankle in the bathroom. There were 3 distinct red marks where his nails had dug into my skin. It wasn't a dream or my imagination. I should have told my parents. I should have told someone. But I was terrified of getting in trouble for sneaking out. Plus, would anyone even believe me? So I kept quiet. I spent the rest of that vacation barely leaving the house, jumping at shadows, watching the dunes with paranoid attention. I kept expecting to hear something, news about missing children, police investigating, something about a fire on the beach. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing. We went back to Dune Harbor every summer until I was 15, and I never saw that man again. I never found another fire, but I also never went out alone, and I especially never went out at night. It's been 20 years, and I still think about it constantly. What was he burning? Why children's clothes? Who was the boy in the photo? And why did he look like me? Was the man trying to hurt me, or was there some other explanation? Sometimes I wonder if I should have reported it, if my silence allowed something horrible to continue. But I was just a kid, scared and confused. I've searched newspaper archives from Dune Harbor for that summer. I've looked for reports of missing children or strange incidents. Nothing fits what I experienced. All I know is that somewhere out there might be a man who burns children's belongings, who had pictures of a boy who looked like me, and who tried to grab me on a beach when I was 8 years old. And I've never told anyone until now. Story 11. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me back when I was 16. It's been over 10 years now, but some days it feels like it just happened yesterday. Sorry if this is kinda all over the place. I've never actually written this down before. I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood in Newport. Not the nice beachy parts you see on postcards, but the blocks where people lock their car doors when they drive through. My mom worked 2 jobs, so I had a lot of time to myself after school. Like most teenagers, I started experimenting with stuff I probably shouldn't have. There was this corner store about 15 minutes from my house where I'd go to buy weed and blunt wraps. The owner didn't care how old I was, as long as I had cash. I walked there at least twice a week, usually taking this shortcut through an abandoned apartment complex. The place had been empty for years, windows boarded up, trash everywhere, grass growing through cracks in the concrete. But it cut my walk time in half, and I never had any problems there, until that day in April. I remember it was unseasonably warm. I was wearing these dumb jean shorts that were too small and a tank top that showed my midriff. My hair was in these messy braids I'd done myself the night before. I was just trying to look cute, you know? Normal teenage stuff. I took my usual route through the abandoned complex, thinking about nothing important, probably what music I was going to listen to when I got high later. That's when I noticed him. There was this white guy standing near one of the boarded-up doorways. He stood out immediately because he was wearing a button-up shirt and slacks, like office clothes. Nobody dressed like that in our neighborhood. He looked completely out of place, and something about that made my stomach knot up. When I walked past, he smiled at me. "How you doing today?" he asked, all friendly. I didn't answer, just kept walking, a little faster now. In my neighborhood, you learn early that you don't owe strange men conversation. But I could feel his eyes on my back as I walked away. At the store, I tried to shake off the weird feeling. The owner was in a chatty mood, talking about some basketball game from the night before, but I couldn't focus on what he was saying. Something about that man had unsettled me. Still, I bought my stuff and headed back, telling myself I was being paranoid. I decided not to cut through the apartments on my way home. Something just felt off. So I took the long way, which meant walking along the main road. More people, more cars, safer. That was my thinking. I'd barely made it a block when I noticed a white pickup truck parked at the corner near the apartment complex. It wasn't there before, and something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. The windows were tinted, but I could make out a figure in the driver's seat. I quickened my pace, trying not to look like I was freaking out. "Just act normal," I told myself. "You're just being paranoid." Then I heard the engine start up. I didn't turn around, but I could hear the truck moving slowly behind me, following me. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was about to break into a run when the truck suddenly accelerated and pulled up right beside me. Before I could even scream, the driver's door flew open and the same well-dressed man jumped out. It happened so fast. 1 second I was walking, the next his arms were around my waist, lifting me off the ground. I was only about 100 pounds back then. He picked me up like I was nothing. I remember the smell of his cologne mixing with cigarettes, how his fingers dug into my ribs as he tried to drag me toward the truck. I kicked and screamed and elbowed him as hard as I could. I connected with something, his face maybe, because he grunted in pain, but he didn't let go. I was scratching, hitting, doing everything I could think of, but nothing was working. He was just too strong. "Shut up," he kept saying, his voice eerily calm despite my fighting. "Stop struggling." In that moment, I was sure I was going to die, or worse. All these stories my mom had told me about girls who disappeared and were never found came flooding back. I thought about my mom coming home from work to an empty house, waiting for me, calling my phone over and over. That's when I heard her. "Hey, let her go! Let her go right now!" The voice was raspy, loud, and coming from somewhere behind us. The man's grip loosened just slightly as he turned to look, and I managed to twist enough to see her too. It was this homeless woman who hung around our neighborhood. Everyone knew her. Diane was her name. She was probably in her 50s but looked much older. Years of drug use had ravaged her body. She was rail-thin with sores on her face and arms. Most people avoided her or gave her spare change just to make her go away. But there she was, running toward us, waving her arms and screaming like a banshee. "I see you! I see what you're doing! Let her go!" The most incredible thing happened next. The man just dropped me, just like that. I fell hard onto the sidewalk, scraping my palms and knees. By the time I looked up, he was already jumping back into his truck. Diane was still coming toward us, still screaming. pointing at the truck like she was memorizing the license plate. The man slammed his door shut and peeled away, tires screeching. I watched the white truck disappear around a corner, too stunned to move. Diane reached me and helped me to my feet. Up close, she smelled like she hadn't bathed in weeks, and her hands were shaking badly, probably from withdrawal. "You okay, baby?" she asked, looking me over. "Did he hurt you?" I shook my head, still unable to speak. I was trembling all over, my brain trying to process what had just happened. "I seen that truck before," Diane told me, her eyes darting around like she was making sure he wasn't coming back. "Been circling the neighborhood for days, watching girls. I knew he was up to no good." I finally found my voice. "Thank you," I whispered. It seemed so inadequate for what she'd done. She waved it off. "You get on home now, and don't be walking alone no more." I nodded, then surprised both of us by hugging her quickly before running all the way home. I didn't stop running until I was inside with the door locked behind me. I never told my mom what happened. I was afraid she'd find out why I was walking there in the first place, and then I'd be in serious trouble. Plus, a part of me couldn't believe it had really happened. It felt like a nightmare that faded a little more each day. But I never forgot what Diane did for me. The next time I saw her, about a week later, I bought her a sandwich and coffee from the deli. She seemed surprised but accepted it gratefully. After that, it became a regular thing. Whenever I spotted her, I'd bring her food, sometimes clothes or blankets when the weather got cold. I never mentioned what happened, and neither did she. It was this unspoken thing between us. This went on for years, through the rest of high school, then while I was working and going to community college. Every time I saw her, I'd help her out however I could. She was always grateful but never asked for anything. Sometimes she'd tell me about her grandkids that she hadn't seen in years. Her daughter had cut her off because of the drug use. I could hear the pain in her voice when she talked about them. When I was 25, I got a decent job with benefits. The first thing I did with my new salary was approach Diane about rehab. I'd been saving up for it, but now I could actually afford it. To my surprise, she agreed right away. "I'm tired," she told me. "So damn tired of living like this." I paid for a 90-day program at a decent facility, visited her every weekend. It wasn't easy. She relapsed twice before it finally stuck, but she did it. Got clean, stayed clean. With help from some social workers, Diane got into transitional housing, then her own small apartment. She reconnected with her daughter, started seeing her grandkids again. Eventually, she even found a job at a thrift store. Nothing fancy, but it was something she was proud of. Now she's been sober for almost 5 years. We still meet up for coffee sometimes. She looks like a completely different person. Still has those hard years written on her face, but her eyes are clear now. She smiles more. As for me, I never walked alone through that neighborhood again. Never took shortcuts through abandoned buildings. I carry pepper spray everywhere I go, even now. I'm always watching, always aware of my surroundings. That day changed something fundamental in how I move through the world. The police never found the guy. I eventually did file a report, but without a license plate number and only vague descriptions, there wasn't much they could do. Sometimes I wonder if he went on to hurt other girls. The thought keeps me up at night. But then I think about Diane, how this horrible thing led to something good for her, how she saved me, and then, in a way, I helped save her too. I still don't understand why he let me go. Maybe he wasn't expecting witnesses. Maybe something about Diane scared him off. Or maybe, just maybe, he had a moment of conscience when confronted with his actions. I'll never know. What I do know is that guardian angels don't always look like what you'd expect. Sometimes they're homeless addicts with raspy voices who notice things others don't. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, when you help someone who once helped you, you both end up saving each other. Story 12. I've never shared this with anyone outside my closest friends. It happened 6 years ago when I was 17, but I still get chills thinking about it. My buddy Colton and I were bored out of our minds that Saturday night. We'd spent all afternoon playing Xbox at his place, the usual FIFA and Call of Duty marathons, until we hit that point where we needed to do something else before our brains turned to mush. We could drive out to the old church, Colton suggested, tossing his controller aside. Everyone in our town knew about the abandoned church at the end of Oak Ridge Road. It sat about 2 miles outside town limits, partially hidden by overgrown trees. One of those local landmarks people always talk about but rarely visit. I'd only seen it once before, on a dare when I was maybe 12, and even then we just drove by. Sure, why not? I replied, though something in my gut tightened at the idea. By the time we got in Colton's beat-up Honda Civic, it was already dark, probably around 9:30 or 10. We drove with the windows down, the summer air still warm, even though the sun had set hours ago. The main road eventually turned into a narrower one, and then we made the turn onto what remained of Oak Ridge Road. The moment we turned onto that road, the atmosphere changed. The pavement was cracked with weeds growing through, and there were no streetlights out here, just our headlights cutting through the darkness. The trees on either side seemed to close in as we drove deeper. Didn't remember it being this creepy, I muttered, trying to keep my voice casual. Colton laughed, but it sounded forced. That's because you were probably here during daylight, dumbass. After about half a mile of slow driving over the broken road, the church appeared in our headlights. I remember my breath catching in my throat. It was bigger than I remembered, a looming stone structure with a bell tower that reached toward the night sky. The moonlight cast strange shadows across its facade, and the stained glass windows were mostly broken, creating jagged black holes in the walls. The forest had practically swallowed the building. Trees and bushes pressed against its sides, and the iron fence that once surrounded the property was barely visible beneath vines and tall grass. "Whoa," Colton whispered, killing the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. We sat there for a minute, just staring. Part of me wanted to suggest we turn around and go get some food at the 24-hour diner instead, but I didn't want to look like a coward. "Let's check it out," Colton said, reaching into his glove compartment for a flashlight. I turned on my phone's flashlight too, though the battery was already at 20%. The moment we stepped out of the car, I felt the isolation. No traffic sounds, no distant voices, just the occasional rustle of leaves and the chirping of crickets. We made our way toward the fence, our shoes crunching on gravel and dead leaves. "Look, there's a break in the fence over here." Colton pointed to a section where the iron bars had collapsed. We carefully stepped through, pushing aside thorny bushes that scratched at my arms. As we approached the church, I noticed the temperature seemed to drop. Probably just the shade from the trees, but it felt like walking into a refrigerator. The massive wooden double doors loomed before us, one hanging slightly ajar. "After you," I said to Colton, trying to make a joke of it. He rolled his eyes but stepped forward, pushing the door open. The creak it made was so loud and prolonged that we both jumped. The sound echoed throughout the entire building, bouncing off walls and coming back to us distorted. "Jesus," Colton whispered. That was straight out of a horror movie. We stepped inside, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. What struck me immediately was how intact everything looked. I'd expected graffiti, trash, broken furniture, the usual signs of teenagers hanging out in abandoned places. But the rows of wooden pews looked almost untouched, arranged neatly as if waiting for Sunday service. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise, it was like stepping back in time. Our footsteps echoed as we walked slowly down the center aisle. The air smelled musty, like old books and mildew. Cobwebs stretched between the ceiling beams, and our flashlights created weird, shifting shadows as we moved. "This place is actually in good shape," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. "Yeah, weird that," Colton started to say, but was cut off by a sudden sound that filled the entire church. It was like something heavy being dragged across the floor, followed by a dull thud. We both instinctively crouched down, our hearts pounding. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, frantically scanning with my flashlight. "I don't know," Colton whispered back, "but I think it came from over there." He pointed his beam toward a door near the entrance that I hadn't noticed before. "Could have been something falling," I suggested, trying to convince myself more than him. "This place is old. Stuff probably shifts all the time." We stayed crouched for what felt like forever, listening. When nothing else happened, we slowly straightened up. "Want to keep looking around?" I asked. Colton nodded, though I could tell he was nervous. "Yeah, we came all this way." We continued down the aisle, our flashlights sweeping across the pews and up to the ornate ceiling. I found myself drawn to the pulpit at the front of the church, a massive wooden structure with intricate carvings. "I'm going to check this out," I said, walking toward it while Colton examined some of the remaining stained glass. The pulpit was raised on a small platform, giving whoever stood there a view of the entire congregation. I climbed the 3 steps and ran my hand along the smooth wood, leaving trails in the dust. From here, I could see the entire church stretching out before me. It was eerily beautiful in a way, moonlight filtering through the broken windows, casting blue-white patches across the pews. After about a minute, I rejoined Colton. "Should we check out that room you spotted?" I suggested. We made our way back toward the entrance, to the door Colton had pointed out earlier. It was a smaller wooden door, partially ajar. I pushed it open carefully, wincing at the slight creak. Inside was what looked like a storage room or office. Chairs were stacked against one wall, and old cardboard boxes were piled everywhere. A desk sat in one corner, its surface covered in what looked like old church bulletins, now yellow with age. "Check this out," Colton said, picking up what looked like an old hymnal. He flipped through it, releasing small clouds of dust. I was examining some framed photographs on the wall, black and white images of the church when it was new, surrounded by cleared land rather than forest, when we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the main church area, from the direction of the pulpit, moving toward the entrance. We both froze, our flashlights pointed at the floor. The footsteps continued, heavy and measured, the unmistakable sound of someone walking across the wooden floor. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. We stood completely still, barely breathing, as the footsteps moved closer to the main entrance. Through the partially open door, I caught a glimpse of someone, crossing through the darkness of the main church, just a silhouette, moving steadily toward the entrance door. Then came the sound of the heavy door opening, the same prolonged creak we'd heard when we entered. The door closed with a heavy thud that seemed to reverberate through the entire building. Neither of us moved for what felt like an eternity. My legs had turned to jelly, and cold sweat was running down my back. "Was that?" Colton finally whispered, unable to finish his sentence. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We waited several more minutes, listening intently for any sound. Nothing but the faint rustle of leaves outside and our own ragged breathing. "Let's get the hell out of here," I finally managed to say. We crept back into the main church area, our flashlights darting everywhere. The space looked exactly as we'd left it, empty pews stretching toward the pulpit, dust undisturbed except for our own footprints. We moved as quietly as possible toward the entrance, half expecting something to jump out at us from the shadows. When we reached the doors, Colton hesitated before pushing one open. It made the same awful creak, but at that point, we didn't care who or what heard us. The moment we were outside, we ran, past the broken fence, through the overgrown yard, all the way to the car. We didn't stop running until we reached the main street with its blessed streetlights and occasional passing cars. We never spoke much about what happened that night. What could we say? We'd both seen someone, or something, walk out of that church. Someone who must have been hiding near the pulpit where I had just been standing minutes before. But here's the thing that still haunts me 6 years later. There were no other doors near the pulpit. No closets, no hidden passages that we could see. Just solid stone walls and wooden floors. Whoever was in there with us would have had to be standing in plain sight, yet we saw nothing until they walked out. I've driven past the turnoff to Oak Ridge Road many times since then, but I've never gone down it again. Sometimes I wonder if the church is still standing, or if the forest has finally claimed it completely. All I know is that something was in there with us that night. Something that waited until we weren't looking before making its exit. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and the house is completely silent, I swear I can hear those same slow, deliberate footsteps moving across a wooden floor. Story 13. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 weeks since I found that damn box, and I keep seeing those grainy photos every time I close my eyes. I figured writing this down might help me process everything that happened. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can tell me how to stop thinking about it. It was just a regular Saturday morning in Cedarwood. Nothing special. The kind of early October day where the air feels crisp, but the sun still warms your skin. I'd gone out for my usual weekend routine, coffee at Riverside Cafe, then a walk around the neighborhood to check out any yard sales. I do this almost every weekend when the weather's nice. I love finding old books, vintage jewelry, or unique home decor items that have a story behind them. I'd already hit 3 sales that morning and was about to head home when I noticed one more on Maple Street I hadn't seen before. Just a small setup in the driveway, a few tables with odds and ends, nothing fancy. The kind where you can tell someone's just trying to clear out their house rather than make serious money. The guy running it was maybe in his 50s, thin with graying hair and this vacant expression that made me wonder if he even wanted to be there. He barely looked up when I approached, just nodded and kept scrolling on his phone. I browsed through the usual stuff, old kitchen gadgets, a collection of DVDs, some clothing that had seen better days. That's when I noticed it at the back of the table, this weathered cardboard box, about the size of a small microwave, pushed behind everything else like it wasn't meant to be seen. It was covered in a layer of dust so thick I could tell it hadn't been touched in years. Something about it just caught my eye. Maybe because it looked so out of place among the other items that were clearly from this decade. "Mind if I look at this?" I asked, pointing to the box. The man glanced up, and I swear, just for a second, Something flashed across his face. Concern? Nervousness? It was gone so quickly I thought I'd imagined it. The box? Just old stuff in there, he said with a shrug. Feel free to look if you want. I pulled it forward, wiping some of the dust off with my sleeve. No markings, no labels, just an ordinary cardboard box with the flaps folded shut. I don't know why I felt so drawn to it, but I did. When I opened it, I didn't immediately understand what I was looking at. On top was a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings. I picked up the first one and felt my stomach tighten as I read the headline, "Unidentified woman found dead near Greenville Creek." The article was dated March 15th, 1992. I flipped through more clippings, all about the same case. A woman in her 20s found strangled, no identification, dubbed Jane Doe by local authorities. The articles spanned several weeks, documenting the investigation that apparently went nowhere. The last one was dated about a month after the murder, stating that police had no leads and were asking the public for help. That was disturbing enough, but what lay beneath the clippings made my blood run cold. There were photographs, not professional ones, but grainy, almost surveillance-like shots of a young brunette woman. In one, she was walking into what looked like an apartment building. In another, she was sitting on a park bench, seemingly unaware she was being photographed. There were about 15 photos in total, all of the same woman, all taken from a distance, like whoever took them didn't want her to know. I glanced up at the seller, who was pretending not to watch me, but I could feel his eyes on me every few seconds. Under the photos was what really disturbed me: personal items. A hairbrush with strands of long brown hair still tangled in the bristles. A silver charm bracelet with a heart pendant. A faded blue scrunchie. A tube of lipstick nearly used up. And at the very bottom, folded neatly, was a floral blouse with tiny pearl buttons. These weren't just random items. This was a collection. Someone had deliberately saved these things, alongside news of this woman's murder. My hands were shaking as I closed the box. I felt like I needed air, needed to get away from it, but something made me ask the seller about it. "Where did you get this stuff?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice cracked. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Found it in the attic when I was cleaning out. Never opened it. Belonged to the previous owner, I guess." It was such an obvious lie. The way he avoided eye contact, the way his fingers tapped nervously against his leg. Everything about his body language screamed that he knew exactly what was in that box. "How much?" I asked, surprising myself. I didn't even know why I wanted it, just that I couldn't leave it there. $5, he said quickly, like he was eager to get rid of it now that I'd seen the contents. I paid him and carried the box to my car, feeling its weight like something much heavier than cardboard and paper. The whole drive home, I kept glancing at it on my passenger seat, half expecting it to move or disappear. When I got home, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. I read each article carefully this time. The woman had been found by hikers near Greenville Creek, about 20 miles from Cedarwood. She'd been strangled, likely dead for less than 24 hours when discovered. No identification, no matching missing persons reports. The police estimated she was between 20 and 25 years old. One article mentioned that investigators believed she had a boyfriend who had suddenly disappeared around the time of her death. They wanted to question him but had no name, no photo, nothing to go on. I studied the photos more closely. They were taken in different locations: outside a grocery store, at a bus stop, walking down a street I recognized as being just a few blocks from where I'd bought the box. In each one, she was alone. In each one, she was unaware of the camera. In each one, she looked ordinary. Just a young woman going about her day. No idea someone was documenting her movements. No idea someone was watching her. When my husband David got home around 3, he found me still at the kitchen table, surrounded by these grim artifacts. "What's all this?" he asked, setting down his gym bag. I explained where I'd found the box and what was inside. At first, he thought I was overreacting. "Maybe it's just research materials," he suggested. The guy could have been a true crime buff or a journalist working on the case. But as he looked more closely at the items, his expression changed. He picked up one of the photos, studied it, then set it down carefully. "These aren't press photos or police photos," he said quietly. "These were taken by someone following her. And this stuff," he gestured to the personal items. "No journalist would have the victim's hairbrush or clothes." We looked at each other, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. The box hadn't been assembled by someone investigating the murder. It had been put together by someone who knew who Jane Doe was, someone who had collected her things, someone who might have been the last person to see her alive. "We need to call the police," David said, already reaching for his phone. While we waited for them to arrive, I kept staring at the woman in the photos. Who was she? Did she have family still wondering what happened to her? Did she know the person who took these pictures, who collected her things, who possibly ended her life? 2 officers arrived about 40 minutes later. They listened to my story, examined the contents of the box, and took it all away as evidence. They asked for the seller's address, which I gave them, along with a description of the man. Later that evening, a detective called to tell me they'd questioned the seller. He claimed the box belonged to his uncle who had passed away the previous year. The uncle had been a chemist at the local community college until the early 2000s when he retired. They were investigating the connection. I've been checking the local news daily, hoping for an update, but there's been nothing public yet. The detective promised to keep me informed if they make any progress in identifying Jane Doe or solving her murder. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. For almost 30 years, that box sat somewhere, in an attic, a closet, under a bed, holding the secrets of a young woman's life and death. For almost 30 years, someone kept those photos, those personal items, those news clippings about her murder, kept them like souvenirs, like trophies. And I can't stop wondering, was the seller really just the nephew cleaning out an attic? Or was he the boyfriend mentioned in the articles, the one who disappeared right after her death? Was I face to face with a killer and didn't even know it? I keep replaying that moment when I first opened the box, trying to remember exactly how he reacted. Was that flash of emotion on his face fear that someone had discovered his secret? Or was it genuine surprise at what I'd found? Every time I pass a yard sale now, I wonder what secrets might be hiding in plain sight. What darkness might be concealed in an ordinary cardboard box, waiting for someone to discover it. The police haven't released any updates. The local paper hasn't run any stories. It's like that box never existed, except in my mind, where I can still see every photo, every headline, every strand of hair in that brush. I don't know if they'll ever identify her. I don't know if they'll ever find who killed her. But I do know that I can't forget her face. And I can't shake the feeling that I brought something evil into my home that day. Not just a box of old papers and trinkets, but a glimpse into the darkest part of human nature. The part that watches, collects, keeps mementos of destruction. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can smell her perfume, something floral and faint that wasn't there before I brought that box home. As if by disturbing her things, I somehow invited her spirit to follow me, as if she's waiting for someone to finally speak her name. Story 14. I've held off on sharing this for years. Part of me still doesn't want to believe it happened, but I need to get this off my chest. I grew up in Oak Ridge, a small rural town where everyone knows your business, and church isn't just something you do on Sundays, it's woven into everything. My family was Southern Baptist, the strict kind. We were taught that demons were real, actual entities that could influence people. Ghosts, though? Those were just confused souls or outright fabrications. Funny how selective religious fear can be. My mother, Eleanor, was complicated. She had what she called an understanding with God, which basically meant she interpreted faith however it suited her at the moment. Looking back as an adult, I recognized she was struggling with untreated mental illness, possibly bipolar disorder mixed with something else. But when you're a kid in a town like Oak Ridge, your mother isn't mentally ill. She's just having one of her spells, or being tested by the Lord. What I'm about to share happened when I was 16. I've questioned it repeatedly, talked myself out of believing it, then circled back to knowing what I saw was real. Whether it was mental illness, addiction, or something darker, I still don't know. The first incident happened on a Tuesday night in October. I remember because we'd just finished decorating the church for the Harvest Festival. I went to bed exhausted around 10:30 and had this vivid nightmare about my mother. In the dream, she burst into my bedroom, her face contorted with rage, her body moving in this jerky, unnatural way. She stood at the foot of my bed and said, "You think you can hide from me? I see through your walls." Her voice was wrong somehow, deeper, raspier. I jolted awake, heart racing, sweating through my pajamas. The relief of realizing it was just a dream lasted exactly 8 seconds. My bedroom door flew open so hard it bounced against the wall. And there stood my mother, in the exact same nightgown from my dream, with the exact same twisted expression, her body doing that same unnatural, jerky movement. "You think you can hide from me? I see through your walls." The words came out in that same wrong voice from my dream. I couldn't move. It was like sleep paralysis, but I was definitely awake. She stood there staring at me for what felt like forever, then slowly backed out, pulling the door closed. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall, followed by the soft click of her bedroom door. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat up with my desk lamp on, a Bible in my lap more out of habit than comfort. The next morning, Mom was making pancakes, humming some church hymn. I approached cautiously and asked if she remembered coming to my room last night. "What?" "No, honey, I slept straight through. You must have been dreaming." She smiled, but something in her eyes seemed uncertain, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I might have dismissed it as a weird coincidence. Maybe I heard her getting up in my sleep and incorporated it into my dream, except for what happened 2 weeks later. My mother had a phobia of snakes her entire life. Not just a normal fear, but full-blown phobia. She couldn't even look at pictures of them without having a panic attack. Dad had to preview nature documentaries to make sure there weren't any snake scenes. I came home from school early that day because of a teacher work day. As I walked up our long driveway, I noticed Mom in the backyard. She was kneeling in the grass near the edge of the woods, and she was handling something. As I got closer, I realized with shock that she was holding a massive snake. Not a garden snake. This thing had to be 7 feet long, thick as my arm. Mom was running her hands along its body, almost lovingly. She was talking to it in a low voice I couldn't quite make out, but her face, she looked gleeful, ecstatic even. "Mom?" I called out, staying a good distance away. She looked up, and for a split second she didn't seem to recognize me. Then her expression shifted, and she looked down at the snake as if seeing it for the first time. She screamed, flung it away, and scrambled backward. The snake slithered quickly into the woods as Mom hyperventilated. I helped her inside, got her water, and called Dad at work. When she calmed down enough to talk, she swore she had been picking berries, and the snake surprised her. "But Mom, you were holding it. You were talking to it." "Amanda, that's ridiculous. You know I can't even look at snakes. You must have seen something else." "I know what I saw, Mom." She became agitated, insisting I was making things up. Dad arrived home early, concerned, and she told him I was spinning tales again. That night, I overheard them arguing, her claiming I was becoming a problem, him defending me, but also sounding confused and worried. The pattern continued, bizarre behavior followed by complete memory loss. Small things at first. Finding her standing motionless in the hallway at 3 in the morning, staring at the wall, catching her writing strange symbols in her journal, which she'd deny when confronted. Hearing her speaking in what sounded like tongues, not the kind practiced at church, in the bathroom. But the worst incident, the one that still gives me nightmares 20 years later, happened during a church lock-in. I was 17 by then, and our youth group was having an overnight prayer event at the church. These were normal, supervised by the pastor and a few parent volunteers with separate sleeping areas for boys and girls in the Sunday school classrooms. Mom had seemed fine that day, even helping prepare food for the event. The lock-in was going as usual, worship music, group activities, prayer circles, then lights out around midnight. I fell asleep in my sleeping bag on the classroom floor alongside 5 other girls. At exactly 4:30 in the morning, I know because the glowing clock on the wall burned that time into my memory, we were awakened by knocking. Not normal knocking, this was rhythmic, deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. It seemed to circle the building, moving impossibly fast. Knock, knock, knock at the front doors, then instantly knock, knock, knock at the side entrance, then the back, then the other side. Pastor Williams got up to investigate, telling everyone to stay put and pray. We heard him walk to the front doors, the main entrance to the church. The knocking had stopped by then. Through the classroom door, I heard the heavy front doors open, followed by Pastor Williams's startled voice saying, "Mrs. Larson, Eleanor, what are you doing here at this hour?" I felt my stomach drop. I got up and went to the main sanctuary, where I saw Pastor Williams standing at the open door. My mother stood on the steps outside, barefoot despite it being February and below freezing. Her clothes were disheveled, her hair wild like she'd been in a windstorm. She was sweating profusely despite the cold, and her eyes were fixed directly on me the moment I entered the room, though she shouldn't have been able to see me from where she stood. She didn't speak to Pastor Williams. She didn't acknowledge him at all. She just raised her hand and beckoned to me with one finger. Pastor Williams turned to me, clearly uncomfortable. "Amanda, your mother is here to pick you up?" The question in his voice was obvious. I walked over slowly. Mom still hadn't spoken or looked at anyone but me. "Mom, what's going on? It's the middle of the night." No response, just that unwavering stare and steady finger motioning me to come. Pastor Williams whispered, "Is everything okay at home? You don't have to go if you don't feel safe." But what could I say? This was my mother, not some stranger. and part of me was more afraid of what might happen if I refused. "It's okay," I told him. "I'll go with her." The drive home was silent and terrifying. Mom drove with mechanical precision, never looking at me. When we got home, she unlocked the door and stood aside to let me enter first. I went to my room, and when I turned around, she was right behind me. I hadn't heard her follow. She stood in my doorway, still silent, just watching me. After what felt like an eternity, she turned and walked to her bedroom. I heard her door close, and then nothing. I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, door locked, though I knew that wouldn't stop whatever was happening. Bible clutched to my chest, praying desperately until sunrise. The next morning, Mom was in the kitchen making breakfast when I finally ventured out. She looked up and smiled brightly. "Morning, sleepyhead. I was just about to come get you from church. Pastor Williams called and said the lock-in is wrapping up early because of the weather forecast." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Mom, you already picked me up at 4:30 this morning." Her spatula paused mid-flip. "What are you talking about? I just got off the phone with Pastor Williams 5 minutes ago. You came to the church in the middle of the night. You brought me home. You stood in my doorway watching me." She laughed, but it was forced. "Honey, you must have had a bad dream. I've been here all night." I called Pastor Williams later that day. He was oddly evasive, saying only that your mother seemed concerned about something, and he thought it best not to question a parent's decision. No one from church ever mentioned the incident again. It was like they'd collectively decided not to address what they'd witnessed. There were other episodes over the next year before I left for college, but none as extreme. Mom would sometimes lose time, as she put it. She'd start a sentence and finish it an hour later, unaware any time had passed. She'd be found standing in odd places, the middle of the road, the neighbor's yard, the church parking lot at midnight. Mom passed away 5 years ago from complications of liver disease. Self-medication with alcohol had been part of her life for decades. I've spent years trying to reconcile what happened. Was it mental illness, addiction, something supernatural? I'm a rational adult now, with a psychology degree and a better understanding of how the mind works. But I still can't explain how my mother appeared in my room exactly as I'd dreamed her, or how she overcame her lifelong snake phobia so completely, or how she made that knocking sound circle the church building in seconds. Sometimes late at night, I still hear 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, and I wonder what was inside my mother during those episodes. What entity or illness took her over and erased her memories, replacing the woman I knew with something darker and more calculating. Whatever it was, I'm terrified it might be hereditary, because sometimes I lose time too. Story 15. I've been putting this off for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe writing it down will help me stop jumping at shadows or checking my rearview mirror every 5 seconds. I still can't sleep right. Every creak in my apartment sends me into panic mode. I've been delivering pizzas for almost 3 years now at a local place in Ribeirão Preto. It's nothing fancy, just your typical family-owned pizzeria where everyone knows each other. The owner, Seu Jorge, is a good guy, always fair with the tips and understanding when deliveries run late. The job itself is pretty straightforward. I take orders, drive around town, hand over pizzas, collect payment, and head back. Simple, right? Well, it was simple until that night 2 months ago. It was a Wednesday, and I was working the closing shift, which meant staying until midnight. These late shifts are usually quiet, a few orders here and there, mostly from college students pulling all-nighters or people getting home late from work. That night was particularly slow. By 11 o'clock, I'd only made 4 deliveries, and I was sitting at the counter scrolling through my phone, just waiting for my shift to end. Then, the phone rang. Jorge had already gone home, leaving me and the cook, Renato, to close up. I answered with our usual greeting, and a man with a deep voice ordered 2 large pizzas, 1 calabresa and 1 4-cheese, plus a 2-liter soda and some breadsticks. Nothing unusual about the order itself, but then he gave me the address, and something felt off. He claimed to be at some cabins on the outskirts of town, in an area I vaguely knew was where rich people supposedly had these hidden mansions and vacation homes. I'd never delivered there before. The man gave detailed directions, saying I needed to drive down Estrada dos Eucaliptos for about 6 kilometers, then take a right onto a gravel road marked by a wooden sign. He said I couldn't miss it. I repeated the address back to him, and he confirmed it was correct. Before hanging up, he added, "Make sure you bring change for 500 reais. That's a huge bill for just 2 pizzas, but rich people do weird stuff sometimes, so I didn't question it." Renato prepared the order while I counted my change, making sure I had enough to break a 500. The pizzas were ready by 11:20, and I loaded them into my beat-up Fiat Uno, programming the main road into my GPS. The drive started normally enough. The streets got darker and emptier as I left the city center behind. My headlights cut through the night as I turned onto Estrada dos Eucaliptos, a poorly lit road flanked by, surprise, eucalyptus trees that created these weird, shifting shadows. My car's ancient radio kept cutting out, which didn't help my growing uneasiness. After driving for what felt like forever, I spotted the wooden sign the customer had mentioned. Alho Fruso Cabins, it read in faded paint. I turned onto the gravel road, wincing as rocks pinged against the underside of my car. The gravel road went on for maybe half a kilometer, winding through dense forest. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness. Finally, I reached a small clearing with a larger wooden cabin that looked like some kind of reception area, and beyond it, I could make out several smaller cabins scattered among the trees. There were no other cars around, no lights on in the reception area, nothing but the sound of cicadas and the occasional rustle from the forest. I checked the order details again on my phone. Cabin 3. I scanned the area and saw small numbered signs pointing down different footpaths. The sign for cabin 3 pointed to a narrow dirt path that disappeared into the trees. Here's where I should have listened to my gut. Everything about this felt wrong. But I'd already driven all this way, and the pizzas were getting cold. Plus, I needed the tip. My rent was due in 2 days, and I was still short. I parked my car near the reception building, grabbed the pizza warmer bag, and started down the path toward cabin 3. The trail was lit by these pathetic little solar lamps that gave off just enough light to see a couple steps ahead. The forest pressed in from both sides, and I swear I could feel eyes on me the entire time. The walk to the cabin took about 5 minutes. 5 minutes of jumping at every twig snap and rustle in the bushes. I kept telling myself it was just animals, maybe a possum or something. Finally, I reached cabin 3. It was a small wooden structure with a little porch and a couple of chairs out front. Unlike what you'd expect from rich people's accommodations, it looked pretty basic. The most unsettling thing? It was completely dark inside, not a single light on. I stood on the porch, pizza bag in hand, and knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I pulled out my phone and called the customer's number. It rang and rang but went to voicemail. I was about to leave when my phone pinged with a text message from the same number. Doors unlocked. Please leave pizzas on the table inside. Tip on counter. I stared at that message for a good 30 seconds. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. But then I thought about my empty bank account and how Jorge would react if I came back with the pizzas without even trying to deliver them. So I tested the door. It was unlocked, just like the text said. I pushed it open slowly, and it creaked like something straight out of a nightmare. The cabin was pitch black inside. "Hello?" I called out. "Pizza delivery." No response. I fumbled for a light switch near the door and flipped it on. A dim bulb illuminated what looked like a small living room with a kitchenette. There was a wooden table in the center, just like the customer had said. To my left was a closed door, probably leading to a bedroom. To my right was a small bathroom with the door ajar. The cabin smelled musty, like it hadn't been used in a while. There were no personal belongings visible, no luggage, no food in the kitchenette, nothing to indicate someone was actually staying there. But on the counter was a 50 reais bill. The tip, I guessed. Still feeling uneasy, I set the pizza bag down on the table and started unpacking the order. That's when I heard it, a slight creaking sound coming from the bedroom. I froze, pizza box still in my hands. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Your pizza's here." The bedroom door opened slowly, and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, wearing a dark hoodie despite the warm night. He had this weird smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice matching the one from the phone. "I was just getting your tip ready." He moved toward me, reaching into his pocket. "I've got your money right here." Something about the way he approached, too eager, too direct, sent alarm bells ringing in my head. He wasn't looking at the pizzas. He was looking at me, calculating something. I didn't wait to find out what. I dropped the pizza box and bolted for the door. But as I yanked it open, I slammed right into someone else, a second man who had apparently been waiting outside. He was shorter but stockier, with a shaved head and a tattoo on his neck. He grabbed for my arm, but I twisted away, pure adrenaline taking over. The first man shouted something, and they both lunged for me. I ducked under the second man's arm and sprinted down the path, not looking back. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the underbrush. One of them was gaining on me. I could hear his heavy breathing getting closer. The path seemed twice as long as before. The dim solar lights blurred as I ran past them. A branch whipped across my face, drawing blood, but I didn't slow down. All I could think was, "Get to the car, get to the car, get to the car." When the reception building finally came into view, I nearly cried with relief. I fumbled for my keys as I ran, pressing the unlock button repeatedly. I reached my car and yanked the door open, throwing myself inside. As I was pulling the door shut, a hand grabbed the edge of it. The tattooed man had caught up to me. His face was contorted with rage as he tried to force the door open. I turned the key in the ignition, praying that my piece of crap car wouldn't choose this moment to stall. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas while simultaneously kicking at the man's fingers. He let go with a howl of pain, and I slammed the door shut as the car lurched forward. In my rearview mirror, I saw both men standing in the clearing, watching my taillights disappear. They weren't running anymore. They were just watching. That image, those two figures standing perfectly still in my rearview mirror, still haunts my nightmares. I drove like a maniac back to the main road, calling the police as soon as I had cell service again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The police took my statement that night, then investigated the cabin the next day. What they found chills me to this day. The men had used a fake phone number to place the order. They'd paid with an untraceable gift card. and according to the actual property manager, who they contacted after finding the business information, nobody had rented cabin 3 that night. The place should have been empty. The investigators found evidence that someone had broken into the cabin earlier that day and been waiting there for hours. Hours. They'd set a trap and waited patiently for someone, anyone, to walk into it. They found rope, duct tape, and a hunting knife hidden in the bedroom. The worst part? The police believe the second man, the one who was waiting outside, had been hiding in the woods watching me the entire time I walked down that path. He'd been tracking me, letting me get deep into the isolated area before making his move. They never caught them. The case is still open, but the trail has gone cold. I quit my delivery job the next day. I can't drive down dark roads anymore. I check under my car before getting in. I've installed 3 new locks on my apartment door. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear footsteps on my porch. Sometimes I think I see that tattooed neck in a crowd. I don't know what they wanted from me. Maybe it was robbery. Maybe it was something worse. But what keeps me up at night is knowing how carefully they planned it all. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they're still out there. If you deliver food, please be careful. Don't go to secluded locations alone. Don't enter someone's house, even if they say it's okay. It's not worth it. No tip is worth what could have happened to me in that cabin. Story 16. I've never told this story to anyone outside our friend group. It's been 5 years, and I still get chills thinking about what happened that night. I guess I'm ready to talk about it now. Back in high school, my 5 closest friends and I had this weird Easter tradition. We'd created this game, kind of a mix between manhunt and Easter egg hunting, that we played in the woods behind my friend Raz's house. His place was perfect for it since it was on the outskirts of Pinewood, our small rural town, with acres of forest behind his property. That particular year, we were juniors in high school. Raz's parents had gone to visit his grandma for Easter weekend, and of course, he immediately invited us all to stay over. It was me, Ethan, Jake, Race, Chuck, Arthur, and Raz. We'd been friends since elementary school, the kind of tight-knit group you only get in small towns where there's nothing else to do. We decided to play our game on Thursday night before the actual Easter weekend. The plan was to stay up late, play video games, eat junk food, typical high school sleepover stuff. But the main event was always our Easter woods game. After demolishing a couple of pizzas, we headed outside around 7:30. It wasn't completely dark yet, but the sun was setting, and the woods were already getting that eerie twilight look. We divided into teams, me, Chuck, and Raz as the seekers, and Jake, Arthur, and Race as the hiders. We set the boundaries like we always did. The fence line to the east, the creek to the north, and the slope that led down to Mr. Peterson's horse pasture to the west. The hiders took a bag of plastic eggs filled with candy and headed out first. They had 15 minutes to hide the eggs and themselves. We set timers on our phones and waited on Raz's back porch, talking about college applications and which teachers we couldn't stand. Normal stuff that seems so trivial now. When our timers went off, we split up. That was the rule. Seekers had to go separate ways to cover more ground. I headed toward the eastern part of the woods where the trees were denser. I kept my flashlight beam low and mostly off, just flicking it on occasionally to check my path. The whole stealth aspect was part of the fun. About 10 minutes in, I'd found 2 eggs and was feeling pretty good about myself. Then I saw movement ahead between the trees. It was just a quick shadow, but I was sure it was one of the guys. I switched off my flashlight completely and crept forward, using the little moonlight filtering through the branches to guide me. I could hear breathing now, someone trying to be quiet but not quite managing it. I crouched behind a fallen log, waited for a few seconds, then jumped up, lunging forward with my flashlight pointed ahead and yelled, "Gotcha!" But it wasn't Jake. It wasn't Arthur. It wasn't Race. It was a man I'd never seen before. His hair was dark and slicked back with what looked like sweat or grease. His eyes were so wide they seemed to bulge from his face. His clothes were dirty and torn in places, and he was staring right at me with this expression I still can't forget, like he was both terrified and furious at the same time. For a second, we just froze there, staring at each other. I remember thinking maybe he was a hiker who got lost, or some homeless guy camping in the woods. But before I could say anything else, he charged at me. He hit me like a truck. I'm not a small guy. I played basketball all through high school. But this man knocked me flat on my back. The fall knocked the wind out of me, and before I could even catch my breath, his hands were around my throat. I could feel his fingers digging into my neck, cutting off my air. I tried to pry his hands away, but he was incredibly strong. His face was inches from mine, and I could smell his breath, like something rotting. He wasn't saying anything, just making this horrible grunting sound as he squeezed harder. Black spots started dancing in my vision. I was kicking and thrashing, but it felt like my strength was draining away fast. I genuinely thought I was going to die there in those woods. Then, suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the trees nearby. The man's head snapped up toward the light, and for a split second, his grip loosened. I managed to get one good gasp of air and knee him in the stomach. He grunted and rolled off me. I heard Chuck's voice calling my name, and the man scrambled to his feet and bolted into the darkness. By the time Chuck reached me, I was coughing and clutching my throat, trying to get my breathing back to normal. "What happened? Are you okay?" Chuck kept asking, helping me sit up. His flashlight beam caught the disturbed leaves and dirt where I'd struggled with the stranger. "There was a man," I wheezed. "He attacked me. He was choking me." Chuck's face went pale. He immediately started texting the others while helping me to my feet. My legs felt like jelly, and my throat was on fire. We made our way back toward Raz's house, Chuck's arm around my shoulders, both of us jumping at every sound in the woods. The others were already rushing back when they got Chuck's text. We all met up at the edge of the yard, everyone talking at once, asking what happened. I told them about the man, describing him as best I could. Jake wanted to go look for him, but Race and Chuck shut that down immediately. Then Arthur said something that made my blood run cold. "Before we even started the game," he said quietly, "when I was heading out to hide, I saw two people walking through the trees on the north side." We all stared at him. "Two people?" Razi repeated. "What did they look like?" Arthur shrugged, looking uneasy. "I couldn't see them clearly. I thought it was you guys breaking the rules, honestly. But they were moving weird, kind of hunched over. I figured I'd just catch you cheating later and call you out." My stomach dropped. If Arthur had seen two people and I'd encountered a different man on the east side of the woods, that meant there were at least 3 strangers out there. 3 people who had no reason to be in those isolated woods behind Raz's house. "We need to call the police," I said immediately, my voice still raspy from being choked. But Raz panicked. "My parents will kill me if they find out I had you guys over while they're gone. I'm already on thin ice after that party last semester." "Are you serious?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Some psycho just tried to kill me, and you're worried about getting grounded?" "We don't know he was trying to kill you," Raz argued weakly. "Maybe he was just scared you surprised him." People who are just scared don't choke someone until they pass out, I shouted, which made my throat hurt even worse. We argued back and forth on Raz's back porch for what felt like hours. In the end, Raz convinced everyone not to call the police. He kept saying there was no proof, that by the time cops came, the strangers would be long gone, that we'd all get in trouble for trespassing in the woods at night. I wanted to leave right then, but none of us had our own cars yet. We were stuck there until morning, when Jake's older brother was supposed to pick us up. We went back inside, locked all the doors and windows, and stayed up most of the night, jumping at every sound. I don't think any of us slept more than an hour or two. I kept seeing that man's face every time I closed my eyes, feeling his hands on my throat. By morning, my neck had developed bruises in the shape of fingerprints. We never talked about it at school afterward. Raz went back out a week later to collect all the eggs we'd left in the woods. He said he didn't see anything strange, but I noticed he was back before dark. None of us ever played that game again. I refused to stay at Raz's house after that. Our friendship was never quite the same. I think part of me still resents him for not taking what happened seriously enough. The weirdest part? We never heard about anyone else encountering strange people in those woods. No missing persons reports, no break-ins at nearby homes, nothing in the local newspaper. It's like those 3 people appeared out of nowhere just for that night and then vanished. I've researched the history of that area since then and found nothing that would explain what happened. No mental institutions nearby, no prison escapes, no local legends about people living in the woods. 5 years later, I still get nervous in forests at dusk. I still wake up sometimes feeling those hands squeezing my throat. And I still wonder who they were and what they wanted. Were they living out there? Were they planning to break into Raz's house and we interrupted them? Or was it something else entirely? I'll never go back to those woods to find out. Some questions are better left unanswered. Story 17. I still can't wrap my head around what happened that night. It's been 2 months since the incident at the data center, and I've quit that job, but I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. I worked night shifts at this data center in Serra Sombria, a town so small and isolated you probably couldn't find it on a map. The building itself was this massive concrete structure at the end of a long, winding road, completely surrounded by dense forest. Seriously, the place was in the middle of nowhere. My shift ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, and my job was pretty straightforward. Monitor the systems, restart anything that went offline, and basically make sure nothing caught fire. Night shifts, there were usually dead quiet, like pin-drop silence kind of quiet. The building would be completely empty except for me, and maybe the occasional security guard doing his rounds once or twice a night. Most of the time I'd just sit in my little office, watching Netflix or scrolling through my phone. The pay was decent, and hey, getting paid to watch TV isn't exactly the worst gig in the world, right? So this particular night, it was a Wednesday in November, started like any other. I clocked in at 10, grabbed coffee from the break room, and settled into my chair for a long, uneventful night. The weather was awful, pouring rain and strong winds that made this eerie howling sound as it whipped around the building. I remember thinking how glad I was to be inside. Around midnight, I was about 2 episodes deep into this show I'd been binging when I got a notification on my monitoring system. One of the primary servers had lost connection. This wasn't super unusual. Sometimes cables come loose or systems need a reboot, but it was still annoying to have to get up and fix it. I grabbed my flashlight. The server rooms were always dimly lit, and made my way through the maze of corridors to the main storage area. This place was massive, rows upon rows of server racks humming away, blinking lights everywhere, and that constant white noise of cooling fans. The notification had come from Section D, which was at the very back of the facility, so I had to walk all the way through this labyrinth of technology. When I got there, I immediately saw the problem. The primary Ethernet cable for that section had been completely disconnected and was lying on the floor. This wasn't normal. These cables don't just pop out on their own. They're securely fastened with clips. Someone would have had to physically unplug it. I remember feeling this first twinge of unease. I told myself it was probably just the cleaning crew or day staff who had bumped it accidentally earlier. Still, I'd been working there for over a year, and I'd never seen this happen before. I reconnected the cable, checked the system came back online, and then decided to do a quick check of the other sections just to be safe. Everything else seemed fine, so I headed back to my office, trying to shake off the weird feeling in my gut. I was about halfway back, walking through one of the long corridors that connected the server room to the main office area, when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a heavy door closing somewhere in the building. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of that place, it stood out like a gunshot. I froze. For a few seconds, I just stood there, listening. The data center had this weird acoustics where sounds could travel in strange ways, so I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling, or maybe the wind causing a door to shut somewhere. But deep down, I knew better. That was the sound of a door being closed by a person. I picked up my pace, wanting to get back to my office where I had access to the building's communication system. I wasn't panicking yet, but my heart was definitely beating faster than normal. I made it back to my office and locked the door behind me, something I never usually did. I sat at my desk, trying to calm down and think rationally. There were supposed to be security guards patrolling the building, so maybe that's who I heard. I decided to call the security office on the internal line, but no one picked up. That was odd, but not unprecedented. The guards sometimes did exterior patrols. I was just about to try calling again when I heard it, rapid footsteps in the hallway right outside my office. Not the measured, heavy steps of a security guard, but quick, light steps, like someone trying to move fast without making noise, and they passed right by my door. My blood ran cold. I sat there, frozen, staring at the door, half expecting someone to try the handle. The footsteps faded, heading toward the end of the corridor. After what felt like forever but was probably only a minute, I worked up the courage to investigate. If it was security, I needed to let them know I was there so they wouldn't be startled. If it wasn't, well, I needed to know that too. I slowly opened my door and peeked out. The hallway was empty and silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. At the far end of the corridor was a door that led to another section of offices. As I was looking that way, trying to decide what to do, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The door at the end was slowly closing, as if someone had just passed through it. I should have called the police right then. That would have been the smart thing to do. But instead, fueled by some misguided curiosity or bravery or just plain stupidity, I decided to follow. I needed to know who was in the building with me. I moved quietly down the hallway, my heart pounding so loud I was sure whoever was ahead of me could hear it. When I reached the door, I hesitated, then pushed it open slowly. The next section was a wider area with multiple office doors on both sides, about 8 in total. The lights were on, but dimmer here, creating pools of shadow between the light fixtures. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative. "Security? Is someone there?" No response, just that oppressive silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. I took a few steps forward, scanning the corridor. All the office doors were closed. I was about to call out again when something caught my attention. A tiny movement under one of the doors, like a shadow passing by inside the room. That was it. I'd gone far enough. Whatever was happening, I wasn't equipped to handle it alone. I started backing up, planning to return to my office, lock the door, and call the police. I had taken maybe 3 steps back when one of the office doors beside me suddenly opened. It happened so fast, I barely had time to react. In the fraction of a second that the door was open, I caught a glimpse of a figure, tall, definitely male, wearing dark clothes. He darted from the room so quickly I couldn't make out his face, but I saw enough to know this wasn't security. Pure adrenaline kicked in. I turned and ran, not looking back, my only thought to get the hell out of there. I could hear footsteps behind me, not trying to be quiet anymore, but running, pursuing. I burst through the door I'd come through, sprinted down the hallway past my office, and headed straight for the emergency exit that led to the parking lot. I slammed into the push bar of the exit door with all my weight, nearly falling as it opened. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and the rain was still coming down in sheets. I didn't stop. I ran straight to my car, fumbling with my keys, constantly looking over my shoulder. I got the door open, jumped in, locked it immediately, and then just sat there, gasping for breath, watching the building's exit. No one came out after me. The exit door slowly closed itself, and everything was still again, except for the rain drumming on my car roof. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. I explained the situation as best I could, probably sounding like a complete lunatic. To their credit, they took me seriously and said officers would be there quickly. I stayed in my locked car until I saw the police cruisers pull into the parking lot about 15 minutes later. 4 officers went in, while 1 stayed with me to take my statement. They searched the entire facility thoroughly, but found no one. Whoever had been there was gone, probably escaped through one of the other exits into the surrounding forest. The police found the disconnected cable exactly where I said it would be, in the server core section. Their theory was that someone had broken in to explore the facility or possibly steal equipment, and I had interrupted them. The company launched a full investigation, checking security footage to determine how the intruder got in and if anything had been taken. What keeps me up at night, though, is something the lead detective said as they were wrapping up. He pointed out that the path the intruder took, from the server room past my office to that section of offices, was basically leading me through the corridors, like he wanted me to follow, like he was drawing me deeper into the building, away from the exits. I quit the next day. No job is worth that kind of fear. The company tried to convince me to stay, offering more money and assurances that security would be increased, but I couldn't do it. Every time I thought about going back into that building alone at night, my chest would tighten up and I'd struggle to breathe. The police never identified the intruder. The security cameras had been tampered with, several had been turned to face the walls, and footage from others was missing. The company did a full security audit and found no evidence of data theft, just that physical intrusion. I still think about what would have happened if I'd gone further down that hallway, or if I'd checked those offices more thoroughly. Was he trying to trap me? Or was he just as scared as I was, hiding and then running when discovered? I'll never know. But I do know one thing for certain. I'm never working night shift again, especially not in an isolated building in the middle of nowhere. Story 18. I've been a delivery driver for DoorDash for about 8 months now. The money isn't great, but I'm saving up for college, and the late night shifts fit around my day job. I usually stick to the downtown area of Curitiba, where there are plenty of restaurants and apartment buildings close together. Quick deliveries, decent tips. What happened 3 nights ago still has me shaking. I can't sleep. I keep checking my locks. I haven't been back to work since. I need to tell someone about this because the police basically shrugged it off, and I'm starting to question my own sanity. It was a Thursday night, or technically Friday morning, around 1 a.m., which is usually when things start slowing down. Most restaurants are closed by then, but there are still a few late-night spots catering to the bar crowd and night owls. I was about to call it quits when one last order came through on my app. The restaurant was a 24-hour diner I'd picked up from plenty of times. The delivery address was in one of those older business districts on the outskirts of town, maybe 15 minutes away. The payout was surprisingly good, almost 40 reais for what looked like a simple drop-off. I figured someone was working late and got hungry, so I accepted it. I grabbed the food, just a sandwich and some fries, and headed out. As I drove further from downtown, the streets got darker. There were fewer streetlights and hardly any cars. I'd delivered to some office buildings before, but usually during the day or early evening when people were still working. My GPS led me down this narrow road flanked by these massive concrete buildings from like the 70s or 80s. Most of them were completely dark. The whole area felt forgotten. Weeds were pushing through cracks in the sidewalk, and there was graffiti everywhere. I slowed down, checking the building numbers against my app. The address took me to this small, squat building set back from the street. It looked totally different from the tall office towers around it. Just a single story, almost hidden behind overgrown bushes. The parking lot was empty except for a dumpster overflowing with construction debris. My headlights caught what looked like a sign near the entrance, but it was so faded I couldn't read it. I parked and checked my phone again. The customer had added a note: "Building under renovation. Come to the green metal door on the east side." I grabbed the food bag and my phone flashlight and made my way toward the building. The security light above the main entrance was busted, glass scattered on the ground beneath it. The door was chained shut with a padlock. Renovation made sense, I guess, but at this hour, I walked around the side, trying to find this green door. The silence was getting to me. No traffic sounds, no distant voices, nothing. Just my footsteps crunching on gravel and dead leaves. The air smelled like damp concrete and something else, that musty smell abandoned places get. When I finally found the side door, it wasn't green at all. It was red, or at least it had been red once upon a time. Now the paint was peeling off in strips. No windows, no markings, just this solid metal door with a heavy handle. I was about to call the customer when my phone pinged with a message. "That's the door. Bring the food inside, please. I'm in the back office." I hesitated. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was just the late hour and the creepy location making me paranoid. I figured the customer was probably a security guard or a contractor working overtime. I tried the handle and to my surprise it opened. The air that rushed out was stale and cold. I stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind me. The room was dark except for some dim emergency lights, casting weird greenish shadows. It looked like some kind of reception area, with a high counter and chairs stacked against the wall. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed back at me. "DoorDash delivery." No answer. I set the food bag on the counter and took out my phone to message the customer. That's when I heard it, a soft click behind me. I turned around and tried the door. Locked. I pushed harder, then pulled, then pushed again. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. My heart started racing. This wasn't right. I called the customer number, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I tried the DoorDash support line, but the signal was terrible, 1 bar at most. That's when I heard another sound, a door opening somewhere else in the building. Heavy footsteps, more than one person. Hello? I called again, louder this time. I'm just delivering food. The door locked behind me. The footsteps stopped, then started again, faster now, coming my way. Something about those footsteps sent a chill down my spine. They weren't the steps of someone coming to help. I don't know how I knew, but I did. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed my phone and bolted toward the only other doorway I could see, leading deeper into the building. I found myself in a long hallway lined with empty offices. The emergency lights were spaced far apart, leaving pools of darkness between them. I ducked into the first open door I saw and crouched behind a desk, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps entered the hallway. 2 people, maybe 3. They weren't calling out or searching systematically. They knew exactly where they were going. Check all the rooms, a man's voice said, barely above a whisper. He can't have gone far. They were looking for me. This wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding. They had lured me here deliberately. I stayed frozen in place, phone clutched in my hand. The signal was completely gone now. I was on my own. One set of footsteps approached my hiding place. A flashlight beam swept across the wall above me. I held my breath, pressing myself against the desk. The beam moved away, and the footsteps continued past the door. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before I dared to move. My mind was racing. I needed to find another way out. The front door was locked, and going back that way meant facing whoever was hunting me. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept out of the office and continued down the hallway, away from the direction the footsteps had gone. The corridor branched off in several directions. I chose one that seemed to lead toward the back of the building, hoping to find a rear exit. The deeper I went, the stranger the building became. Some areas looked like they were being renovated, with plastic sheeting and construction materials scattered around. Others appeared completely abandoned, with water damage on the ceilings and mold growing up the walls. How could anyone be working here? I turned a corner and found myself in what must have been a break room once. Broken vending machines stood against one wall. A table was overturned in the center of the room, and on the far wall, a window. It was small and high up, but it might be big enough for me to squeeze through. I dragged a chair over and climbed up to check. The window was sealed shut, painted over many times. I looked around frantically and spotted a hammer among some tools left on a shelf. As I reached for it, I heard the footsteps again. Closer now, moving quickly in my direction. I grabbed the hammer and smashed it against the window. The glass cracked but didn't break. I hit it again, harder. A small hole appeared. Again, the hole got bigger. One more time and the glass shattered outward. The noise seemed deafening in the quiet building. I knew they'd heard it. I cleared the jagged edges with the hammer and hoisted myself up. The opening was tight, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I squirmed through, feeling the remaining glass tug at my clothes and scratch my back. I tumbled out onto hard ground, the night air hitting my lungs like a shock. I was in some kind of service area behind the building, surrounded by dumpsters and old air conditioning units. A chain-link fence separated it from what looked like a loading dock for the neighboring building. Voices shouted from inside. They knew I'd escaped. I ran to the fence and climbed it, tearing my jeans and scraping my hands on the rusted metal. As I dropped down on the other side, a door banged open behind me. A flashlight beam swept the area. I sprinted across the loading dock, found a gap between buildings, and kept running. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door unlocked. I threw myself inside and peeled out of there, tires squealing. I drove straight to a police station. The officers took my statement, but I could tell they weren't taking it very seriously. They thought I was exaggerating, or that it was just some homeless people who'd startled me. One officer did check the address on his computer. That building's been partially abandoned for at least 5 years, he told me. The company that owned it went bankrupt. Some developer bought it recently, but renovation hasn't officially started. But someone was there, I insisted. They ordered food. They locked me in. He shrugged. No security cameras in that area. No witnesses. Not much we can do without more to go on. They said they'd send a patrol car by, but I doubt they did. I drove home with all my doors locked, checking my rearview mirror the whole way. I keep replaying it in my mind. Who were those people? What would have happened if they'd caught me? Was it just a robbery gone wrong, or something worse? I canceled all my delivery gigs. I'm not working nights anymore, especially not in areas I don't know well. The creepiest part? When I checked my DoorDash app the next day, the order had disappeared from my history, like it never happened. But I still have the scratches on my back from the broken window, and I still jump at every unexpected sound. I don't know who set that trap or why they chose me. Maybe it was random. Maybe they've done it before. All I know is I'm not going back to that part of town ever again. And if you're a delivery driver reading this, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't end up like I almost did. Another missing person nobody can explain.